So let's see if this is working, shall we? Well, there aren't any audio issues as far as I can see, Knight. The main issue there was it started at 8 o'clock automatically, and I'd forgotten I hadn't finished. Well, I hadn't actually managed to how do I put this? Finish putting away all the shopping. Actually, the whole thing with Tesco's. Please take my apologies because they were supposed to arrive ages ago, and I'm supposed to be cooking dinner, and based on that, and they didn't arrive in time. So, yeah, that's fun. And so instead, I have ordered McDonald's, which did arrive, but I didn't manage to eat it. So I've got my dinner sitting next to me for later once we finish. I'll be eating those when I'm on the Discord server later. Hello everyone, how are we all doing? How goes the world of all of you? As you can see, I'm joined by one of my fluffy research assistants. Actually, speaking of that, and this is an honest question to you all, I keep thinking about getting one of those animations, trying to look and see if I could find an animation of me and my two fluffy research assistants searching through archives and things as a sort of intro screen for when I'm for me to put up lives, so that when they start on time, even if I'm running about a minute late, they'll run through and it'll be a cool little animation for you to sort of watch me and the doggies searching through archives, and maybe the poodle and the corgi helping me find the right book. But I'm honestly not sure how I go about it, or who I talk to, or what I do on that thing. So, any suggestions, any ideas for that, please do. Eat it in an hour, the fluffs will get it while you're not looking. They won't. He's promised me he won't. And we've only got one fluff in the room. We've only got one fluff in the room, and as you might have noticed, this is quite normal for lately. It's usually this one, because the corgi often for some reason, they seem to have decided which is their space for the mornings and evenings. And usually afternoons and evenings, I have this one, and mornings, Zebedee pops in. And then they swap over midday. And they have their meals in these rooms, and that's their policy. So the reason you usually see him is because he's decided that this space is his evening and afternoon space, and so he's here. So yes, the corgi has not gone anywhere. You can probably still hear the corgi, but the corgi has just decided that in the evening he prefers to be in a lounge with my mum and sister, and this one prefers to be in here with me. I have no idea why, but that's their policy. That's what they do. He's always after sausages. Zebedee, and the one who's the real sausage fiend is Zebedee. Laurie is a bit of a sausage fiend. He's always after all my sausage. Well, yeah, he probably is after sausages, but you know, chicken nuggets are usually safe from him. So, hello everyone, this is from Mary Rose to Victory, how and why the construction of the wooden wall changed. Well, honestly, I will admit the eventual video which is going to come through on this, in terms of the Saturday video, which is going to come out next week, very much is focusing on the why. So this video is going to focus more on the how. And there's a reason for that. In a nice way, the why is something which you discuss in long detail, and it's going to be part of tonight's discussion, but it's not going to be as much as on the how. And the how is better for responding to questions. So one's better as a seminar topic, one's better as a lecture topic, is my mind. And so that's how I divided them up. Zebedee's never slacking on his research. He just does his stuff in the mornings. Usually in the mornings, when I'm working here in the mornings, and sometimes you won't see a dog, I think there's a dog around me, because Raleigh usually lies over there. That's because Zebedee lies on the stairs, looking at me going, the whole time. Literally there. So, when I'm looking at the camera, I'm looking at the screen, there is a corgi's head looking at me through the gate, through the stairs. They're good fluffy boys. Yeah. So, with that being said, we've got to really start off with the biggest driver of all this. And before we start in too much, I think this one is making suggestions about getting food refill in his bowl. Oh, yes, you are. How did Papa guess? I could see metal in your bowl. That's terrible, isn't it? Terrible. I could see metal in your bowl. No. There we go. Poodles. Poodles. Stairs are cool for cool. They are especially cool for coolers. Now, one of the things you have to remember is that prior really to the 1500s, very much the weapons at sea are still the weapons at land. It's very much the warfare of land, just with an aquatic background. This is why we have forecastle and all these other things in terms of ship structure. This is why we have all these details, because honestly, they are ships. What they do to fight the battle. And the Battle of Sleeve is a good example of this. I've done videos on that on this channel. The ships basically pull up next to each other, boarders shout "Away!" and the fighting starts taking place, and who's going to control the ships. Now, the thing is, that doesn't necessarily go away with the advent of artillery and cannon. In fact, as I've often told you, the last Royal Navy boarding action, opposed boarding action, was carried out in World War II in Norway. It's not that unusual. It carries on throughout history. And boarding, of course, is famous because it's how they get prize money, because they take ships as prize. And that is something which they are very happy to do. Oh, you big filthy beast. Alright. Okay. Go on, then you're going to be happy. Alright. Now, the thing is, battles would probably have continued on being fought as basically contests at sea, where it required mass and volume, and those were the decisive factors. But then cannons start to come in. And some of the early cannon are really interesting. They're more likely to blow up for you than they are to blow up for anyone else. And so they're not really practical. They're not going to have a massive effect on naval warfare. You might get one or two going to sea, but they're not really going to be something which is going to seriously impact naval warfare. Not until you get to the cast bronze cannon. Now, these are beautiful things. They are always the premier de la creme, the creme de la creme of cannon. They really are. But they're also expensive. But if you have them, if you have enough of them, your ship can make sure that no one's really going to be boarding it without its permission. Because if they get close enough to board, they're also close enough for those cannon to blast large holes in your ship. And now, the moment you have this artillery, it starts a race from building bigger and better ships. Because you still want to board ships because you want to take them. And you want to take their cannon because they're expensive, useful things. And to do that, you want the height advantage to support your boarding parties. Because if you can fire your cannon down onto an enemy deck, you can clear their deck and you can take the deck. And it's not like a modern ship where engineering is several decks below. The sails, all the important things for controlling the ship, are on the deck. If you control the deck of an enemy ship, you control that ship. And you achieve this now with cannon. You might also add in boarding, but the boarding will take place after you've blasted them sufficiently with cannon. After you've done that job. And so, the world is changing. This is the beginning of the change. So it's the beginning of the point at which ship size starts to really matter. It's the beginning of which the traditional methodology of making warships by just adding castles, i.e. the forecastle, aft castle, the sort of fortified towers they added onto cogs at either end is not really going to help anymore. This is the beginning of the period where you're going to have to start considering also the stability and capabilities of the hull, because your firing platform is what's going to dictate how effective your firing is going to be. The position you can get your ship into, the ability you have therefore to maneuver, the speed of your hull, all these things start to matter. So the moment your ship's purpose becomes not just to close and engage, and everyone's is close and engage with boarders, but now it's engage with artillery, it's aim artillery, this is changing things. This is changing the reality and changing design emphasis. So realistically, it's cast bronze cannon which start to have this big impact. Now, if we just consider some of the questions. Unfortunately, I got to check out a Galleon replica, now the Threndard, I think, a while back, and was kind of surprised at how big the 4.5 castles were in person. Well, remember, those are primary fighting positions. They're where you have the arquebusiers, the crossbowmen, the longbowmen. All of them would be in the castles, firing down, trying to clear the enemy deck, while the heavy infantry and troops in the centre would be surging forward. So imagine it's kind of like you're setting your ship up to be a battle line, where you have your ranged units at either end, and you have your infantry in the centre, and they've got to press forward, and your ranged units are about providing that advantage. I know they're telling me PT, and I know you know, but I am trying to train you to be less tubby. Oh... You can have one, but you've got to stop blackmailing the chat into giving you biscuits. Yes, he's cute. HMS Kenobi. Well, it quite literally is the high ground which matters. You know, we think about high ground as being something which affects land battles, but it also affects the naval battles for a whole strophe of time. You know, longer than the age of sail is usually regarded. The high ground... They were putting little fortified towers onto ships as early as Roman and Greek galleys. The Chinese were doing it as well, although we're not always quite sure with some of their ships, because they have some really interesting riverine craft, including, I think they are buffalo-powered water wheel, paddle wheel craft and all these sort of things. They are interesting. Leave. Stop licking the chair. Good boy. What are you eating? Why is it, as any dog owner will know, when your dog suddenly starts eating something which you're sure you haven't given them, that's when you get really worried. So, it's cast bronze cannon which really do start this process. But the thing is, cast bronze cannon are expensive, and you have to gather a lot of material to make them. One of the things about bronze cannon, though, is that when they do go boom, they tend to just crack first. They don't tend to go boom straight up, which means they are very good for navies in this period learning what they need to do, learning what they need to be. The reconstruction of the Golden Hind is a fairly good example of these early ships. And you have to think about just how small they are. They are small. One of the things we're going to realise is that when we're talking about the Mary Rose, she's a Clarke of the First Order. She's built as 500 tons Berthen is built. That is less than a quarter of the Berthen tons of HMS Victory. Less than a quarter. When she's rebuilt after 1536, she's 700 to 800 tons. She is still roughly a third, slightly under, of Victory. So even rebuilt, she is still less than a third the size of Victory. Yet in terms of status, they are the same level. Now, why is Mary Rose reconstructed? Well, they have money, they've got the dissolution of monasteries going, they've got a good ship that came into service in 1511, and they can rebuild her. They can make her better. You need to make them bigger at this time. Why? Because cannon are growing. One of the interesting things you have, especially with bronze cannon, is because bronze is so expensive, standardization is a while away to get to work with bronze. In many ways, when you get standardization in terms of bronze cannon, that's because something else has come about, which we'll be talking a bit later. Bronze cannon are expensive enough, they are artistic enough. That's why when you look at bronze cannon, and these are pretty good examples of them, you start to see they've got ornate decoration all over them. They haven't just got a stamp on them. They're not just the standard looking cannon with a stamp on them. No, they've got florets and all sorts of things. And the more higher status cannon they are, the more they will have embellishments and artistic flair and glory, and they're expensive. Okay? There is often discussion that in the field of the cloth of gold, every single tapestry which Henry VIII took with him could have bought himself another warship. Here's the actual joke of it. Those tapestries could have an individual tapestry could have paid for probably a dozen ships. But they couldn't have paid for the cannon to fill them. It only becomes roughly one tapestry per one warship once you add in the cannon. The cannon cost a lot more than the ships. I know we have this idea that it's the modern world where suddenly weapon systems cost more than the ships that are in them, that steel and air are cheap, but, you know, the weapon systems are expensive. It's not. It has been around since the late 1400s, early 1500s. The cannon and the weapon systems go in the ship cost more than the ship itself. And, well, that's just the way things go. Now, the Mary Rose is a solidly built carrack. Please note this word carrack. She's not a galleon. She's a carrack. Galleons are bigger and later. Carracks are earlier. It basically goes cog, which is what fought the Battle of the Slees. Very, very interesting merchant vessels. Very simply constructed, and as I talked about in the Battle of the Slees video, they are basically, we have a lot of these, we will hire them. We hire merchant ships. For this dude, the decorations carry over from church bell making. Yes. Actually, no, how do I put it? It's usually worse, because you see, when it comes to church bells, you have to be careful what decorations you add, because they can change the tone of the bell. This is what I was once told by a bell maker. Whereas the cannon, as long as it's thick enough material, you can add whatever embellishments you want on there to show off your skill as a bronze as a bronze forger, a bronze caster, and just add them on. So yeah, they just go nuts. Now, the thing is, again, I've already been asked this, Steve, why can you go through why the different types of gun on the Mary Rose and why not the universal mount? Yeah, I can do, and I'm happy to. Because she has a whole range of cannon on her. And they're different sizes. They are different sizes. She has 12 port pieces, which are anti-infantry systems, but more than anything. Culverins and demi-culverins, which are, well, if we go back to them, you've got some culverins here. They are the closest to what we would probably consider cannons. And like, they've got cannons and demi-cannons. All sorts of different types. Sakers, fowlers, falcons, slings, bases. Hailshot pieces and top pieces. Why do they have these different guns? Why does she have so many different types of guns? Well, because, again, it's expensive. Because you are forging as many cannon as you can get your hands on. You are trying to get them, but they're not coming in a factory-style production line. And you want to give your ship as much firepower as you can get, but that's going to depend on what you can get access to. And each cannon gives you slightly different range, slightly different firing. She can, in theory, do a broadside. In practice, good luck! Because all the guns, not only, even if they are roughly the same type, due to the casting process, and if they're built by different makers, they're going to probably be slightly different. Ever so slightly different. And so you're not going to have a uniform broadside. The thing is, you can't do it. You can't get a uniform broadside at this point with the metallurgy available. So this is the beginning of the artillery ships. This is the beginning of them becoming artillery forts and them becoming the capability. But it's definitely not there. It has many options of different types of guns, and they each have their own different ranges. You know, the example we might give is that the culverins can probably achieve a range of 1,300 feet, or roughly 400 meters. Whereas the cannon and demi-cannons, you're going to be lucky if you can get 225 meters, that's 740 foot. And then the port pieces, which I talked about, and as I said, they're close range, I would argue they're mostly anti-infantry, anti-people on decks, etc. places. Their range is roughly 130 meters. So you're not opening fire at the same time. Each gun is an artistic canvas of its own. Each gun is its own canvas. And this is what we're dealing with. Now, one of the interesting things that comes out, you should remember the refit takes place in 1536. Mary Rose is lost in 1545. Now, if you think she doesn't go to sea for 9 years after her refit, I'm sorry to tell you this, but she does. She does. So whilst the refit probably doesn't help her, and the weather doesn't help her, and the crew experience doesn't help her, and all the issues they have with the different types of guns don't help her, it's no one single issue which probably takes this vessel down. It's no one single issue. It's a cumulative effect that takes this vessel down, and it's a sanguine experience for the for the British at this point, for the English at this point, because she's an English ship, technically an English Royal ship, not a British Royal Navy ship. In that they start to look at their vessels and honestly start to consider their seaworthiness. This is the point at which the Royal Navy starts to realise that we can trace back that the oceans around it are actively trying to kill it. It is this point at which they go, they are actively trying to kill us. Okay, how do we survive this? How do we deal this? Now, where do you go from here? Where do you go? Well, honestly, if you want to consider one of the first things that comes about in this period, and has already been started in this period, is the development of the organisation. Because just refitting a ship occasionally isn't enough to keep it in health. You need to maintain it when it's an ordinary. You need to make sure when it's built, it's ready. You need to make sure there are stores ready to go. You need to make sure there are all sorts of things capable to support it. And I've written a nice little thing here, which I'm going to paraphrase for you all a bit, but paraphrase a little bit for it, but it's worthwhile thinking about. This is a good thing I use to understand sheer volume of work, okay? So, consider the Portsmouth block mills. They're finished in 1807. They supplied 130,000 blocks a year by 1808 to the Royal Navy. They require 30 semi-skilled / unskilled men to run, replacing hundreds of highly skilled craftsmen and apprentices, possibly thousands once you go out to all the personnel involved in it. And those people were not made unemployed. Oh no, they found other jobs for them very quickly. There is lots of work to go around. 130,000 blocks a year. For pulleys, for the rigging, for all the systems. And that's in 1807. Up until that point, all the new blocks had come out of the yards, had been handcrafted. Think about the organization which is set up to support them. When we're talking about the Royal Navy at the Battle of Trafalgar, when we are talking about the organization which is going to see, when we're talking about these ships that are being used in the early 19th century, the big 120, 130 gun first rates, well, they're building on not just generations of ship design and ship construction, but infrastructure and organization behind them. Just having the ships and an admiral doesn't give you a fleet. Having the organization behind it is what makes it effective and makes it work. If you don't have both, it isn't going to be there. So, yeah. If you want this to be capable, if you want to be capable of doing all the jobs you need to do, then you need to be able to sustain it and support it. You need to be able to keep it going. You need to be able to maintain it at the level you need. And the thing for the various navies which operate out of Portsmouth and Chatham as the English Navy becomes eventually the British Royal Navy, the thing about this force is they are building upon centuries of infrastructure, centuries of organization, of having a Lord High Admiral, of having the various admirals of England and the various admirals of the coast and the various port supports and the infrastructure they built. One of the things where Britain is kind of fortunate is because there hasn't been a successful, as we technically tend to call it, a successful invasion of Britain in a rather long time. There are whole discussions about various glorious revolutions and this and that we'll leave to one side, but there hasn't been a successful invasion which has been a fort invasion. Our infrastructure, especially in our ports, which is usually the first infrastructure which suffers in any such invasion, has been able to survive and be built upon. And a lot of our existing infrastructure is built on previous infrastructure. And I have great fun sometimes with some of my colleagues, because there's a lot of my colleagues who are historians who are really annoyed because pieces of history have been destroyed by other pieces of history. Literally, we know there's the old house at Chatham, and I'll talk about this tonight. We know there was the first commissioner's house was built there in 1640 to support the Chatham dockyard. We also know that in the 18th century, 1700s that is, someone decided that it wasn't big enough, it wasn't good enough, and demolished it and built a new one. And that new house, by the way, is the oldest surviving piece of naval construction in the country. We know there are old dry docks. We know Henry VII and Henry VIII had dry docks. We also know that they are probably currently where there are dry docks already sitting in Portsmouth and Chatham, and that they just built them straight over them. This is the thing. The organisation has been going a long time. The infrastructure kept evolving and kept being improved. And whilst today we like to venerate and preserve the history, which I have to say as a historian I enjoy because I can go around and see it, you do have to sometimes wonder if things like, I don't know, certain bridges, which are just keep being improved, would be better if they could be picked up and moved, or turned into pedestrian-only bridges, and a new bridge built for the road traffic to go across. And it's the same in our dockyards. If you consider this place, this is the block mills, right? If you want to go see the Portsmouth block mills, you can go and look at them. They're in the naval section of the Portsmouth dockyard. But they're a listed building, and so they can't be removed. But they're also well inside, so they can't really be part of the museum section. And there's a whole dispute over what should be done with them. But honestly, there's me sitting here going, as a historian, I want these buildings preserved. I want to be able to walk around them. I'd like their machinery to be in them and running and be able to see what it was like. But if I'm thinking about it as someone looking at modern defense estate and running and sorting out a navy, honestly, that building should probably be knocked down and replaced with something which is useful to a navy in Portsmouth today. If we're being honest. That's the problem with history sometimes. Now, having this organisation allows you to deploy large ships, because the thing is, as the ships are growing, their needs get bigger. The amount of rope they need gets bigger. The amount of personnel they need gets bigger. The amount of food they need gets bigger. The amount of wood needed to build them, everything. And you need an organisation behind them to work. I was talking to someone the other day who honestly seemed to have this idea that the organisation running trees and organising the building of the collection and, the chopping, the growth, the care, the harvesting and the collection and transportation of trees was something that the Royal Navy just made appear in the 1750s. And it isn't. It's been a growing organisation slowly spreading out. It starts off as local organisations finding the oaks nearest the dockyards, or finding the oaks along the river from the dockyards. And then it starts to expand out across the country, growing in care. And eventually it spans across our colonies, our allies, any neutral power who's happy to sell it to us. It expands and grows with agents all across the world. It works. And by the way, as I've said in a video about the early nascent US Navy before, when they were shopping for people to sort of supply them with wood and sort out their wood stocks for their building their ship programs, all they did was hire the guys who used to do it for the Royal Navy in America. That's literally all they did. Because they knew what they were looking for. Nice lot of stuff going on in the chat. Does the tree organisation still exist? And if yes, what is it called? No, it doesn't exist. Although, interestingly enough, parts of it, when it was were eventually turned into what is, I think, called today. I think is it the National Parks Authority? Yeah, I think it's the National Parks Authority. I think is where it's ended, where they seem to have ended up. If you follow them, but they've gone through many different organisations, and I wouldn't like to say 100%, but I'd say that's part of where their route has certainly ended up. If there's an area in your city in most of Europe called Baltic Wharf, it's where ships brought in timber from the Baltic. Timber mainly used for masts because it was old growth forest with big trees. Yeah. Oh, and Cartoon Man 154, I do agree that it's really weird to me because there are some listed buildings which it doesn't matter whether they're grading, they're very protected, and then there's some other listed buildings which seem to just be it's not it depends seems to depend so much on local councils and so much on the people involved as to how the listed buildings legislation is applied. It seems completely to me haphazard sometimes. There are some who are very, very good, who I will laud completely, and there are others who I have issues with. But I also think there needs to be a level of pragmatism. Again, that building, which I'll be talking about more once we get to the infrastructure point, it's a very cool building, and I'd love to see it preserved. I just don't think preserving it in the middle of the Royal Navy base is probably going to be a sensible idea. You have to either find a way to move it, or you photograph it, 3D laser scan it, recreate it digitally, and then go, sorry. Because, again, there is a certain point you have to be pragmatic about certain things. It's like with bridges, again, the thing is, a bridge is there to be used, not just to be looked at and admired. And if the bridge will not take the weight of vehicles which you need to cross it, then you've either got to build another bridge and turn the old bridge into a lovely footbridge we can walk across, which is fine. That's a perfectly reasonable thing. Or move the old bridge to somewhere where it can be a footbridge. That's an option. Or it has to go. And I don't think that means they need to be replaced with horrid concrete monstrosities or something like that, which are built to the lowest bidder. But you can build something pretty, but it's still often easier and cheaper to build something new on that site than to trying to update old infrastructure to take the demands of the new systems. And just look at the costs of putting in the railway line, the new one across London, Queen Elizabeth line, and the sheer amount of money which was spent reconditioning old tunnels to take the trains versus building new tunnels. It was actually almost to a case where it was half the price to build a new tunnel as it was to recondition the old tunnels. I think possibly even worse in some ways. Hi, Dan Human. So, our next ship as an example here is Triumph. Now, I'm going to tell you now, I'm not going to be talking much about 74s and third rates in this video. I'm not. Because if you want to talk about the growth of systems and how they're impacted and how technology changes, honestly, you're probably going to want to look at a price point above that. You see, as I've said before, there are certain price points which make sense. First rates are where you spend your maximum money. Because they're your status symbols. They're your fleet flagships. They're the things which are your big, heavy, gargantuan hitting machines. They are there for the muscle. So you're going to spend your money on that. That's going to get the latest tech, everything. Your third rates, they are about providing volume. They're about providing mass. You don't necessarily take risks with them. I know we make a big fuss about the French 74 and how that becomes an inspiration idea and the Royal Navy takes it in and looks at it. But honestly, the Royal Navy was already working on various numbers between 64 and 80. And 74 makes sense. They look at the French one, but they already have ideas going on that lines anyway. So it's not something startling new. What they're looking at is something they can build in large numbers to churn out volume at that price point. And then fifth rate's much the same. This is the reason why the fourth and the second rates don't get as much numbers, really, and don't get as much interest. Why several points the first rates outnumber second rates. And why fourth rates usually are a very distant fifth or sixth in terms of numbers of the rated ships. They're usually outnumbered by sixth rates, by pretty much everything else. Outnumbers the fourth rates by a margin. Because of the price points. Now, this ship, Vice Admiral Martin Frobisher's flagship during the Armada, the Triumph, she's the largest ship built in England during Elizabeth I's reign. She's theoretically 1,000 tons burthen. Reality is closer to 742, as she's originally built. Please note I'm saying as she's originally built, because she goes on to be the flagship for Robert Blake. And she goes on to be quite useful. She serves with serves England for nearly 60 years before she's declared condemned. But the thing is, in that time, she goes from being what's known as a four-mast flat galleon to a four-mast race-built galleon, aka a frigate galleon, or a frigate. She's a frigate ship. Frigate-built ship. She's made a lot faster by that. She has her hull completely rebuilt. So the thing is she the same ship that served? Now, this is a point we should really consider, because what you often find with wooden vessels is they can take them apart, reassemble them. Yes, they can replace pieces of wood, but they can also reshape them, reshape their hulls completely. And if you're going from a flat, squat, four-masted galleon to a frigate galleon, you're changing that hull quite considerably. That is definitely a great rebuild time. The thing is, that history of great rebuilds doesn't come from nowhere. It's not something which just suddenly turns up in naval history and suddenly the Royal Navy's going, you know what, we're going to do a great rebuild. And Parliament goes, yeah, we'll accept that without any question. No, it's been going on for quite a while. Mary Rose had a rebuild. But that didn't cause trouble. The Navy didn't suddenly go, oh, we're never rebuilding a ship again. No, rebuilding was fine. There are issues there, though, and the issues were worked on. And honestly, I would say the issues for Mary Rose are more something which are worked on time and time again, because at this point, the Royal Navy's institutional memory is not that deep. And it's not able to be that deep, because there isn't really an institution of a Royal Navy. You are starting to get the beginnings of professionalization, but you are not anywhere near it. Professionalization is something that will come in under, to an extent, James I more, but Charles I will push it along. Then during the interregnum with Cromwell, they'll push it even further. And by the time of Charles II, let alone James II and William, professionalism has started to really hit the Navy. Now, Derp Squad, I'm just saying, just responding to your comment, yeah, it is quite right. You do, the issue of building new tunnels is that the old tunnels are where you want the new tunnels to go, and that's the problem. But it still is the fact that cost a lot more money. And added a lot of time onto construction. And that is also some of the trouble sometimes for the UK. Now, the thing is, you have to do that in that scenario in London. You can't dig those tunnels out, and you can't with all the other things around you. Do I want to see that in a naval dockyard, though? Now, again, with Triumph, she's always a big ship, but it's worthwhile considering that she's the biggest ship built in Elizabeth I's reign, and she's really roughly the same size in Thalm's Burthen as Mary Rose. There is a sort of limit and plateau about how big they're getting. And with this, well, there are reasons for this. The reasons are the infrastructure. One of the things you need to start investing in is not just the organization, but the organization needs infrastructure. It needs buildings. And I've already mentioned that in 1640, you get the first Commissioner's House, which was replaced in 1704. I mean, it's just terrible. It's just a trashing of history. Those people in 1700 trashing a building which was only 60 years old, not knowing that us, sitting here in the 2020s, 320 years later, would be devastated by their wanton destruction of history. It's just terrible. Sorry, I'm channeling a friend of mine who actually did make that speech. I did tell them to be quiet and eat a Snickers bar. I can't think why they weren't happy with me that evening. But seriously, to them it was perfectly normal. It's 60 years old, it's in our way, yeah, we need a bigger, better house. Why? Because the Commissioner's doing more important things, so we need to have a bigger, better one. Now, the thing that's really interesting here is when you start to realise what comes in first. Mast ponds. Now, we've already been talking a little bit about Baltic and firs from the Baltic, where there are these big wood trees and these big forests with these lovely mature fir trees, which are massively high, and you could turn them into beautiful masts. Well, that's a great thing. But the trouble is, you just don't put the wood into your ship. Well, you do actually, the earlier ones. But when you want them to grow bigger, be stronger, you need to find ways to deal the sap to season the wood. And they started by brining it. Literally. They're putting it in seawater. And by the way, if you go to Chatham Dockyard these days, just remember, the car park you're parking in is literally over where the ponds were. Where you park your car is where the ponds were. It's where they used to stick all the masts in the water. Now, that requires a system to maintain it, because you don't just stick the mast in the water, leave it for a couple of hours, and then come back and go, ah, yeah, it's seasoned. It's left in there for years. And you have to develop and test this. You have to work this out. How are we going to do this? What does this do? How do we get the best out of this wood? Because that matters. Because masts, they're technically an expendable item. They get broken in gales and storms. They get smashed in battle. Masts are something you're going to go through. You're going to need to replace. You're going to need to carry spares. You're going to need to have a large stockpile of. You're going to need to have many of them. And you need to sort this out and maintain this. You need to have them seasoning away. And you need to be able to go, okay, those are ones we can pick up now. Those are ones we can't. You know, which ones have seasoned enough time? You need to keep track of them. And by the way, seasoning isn't always perfect. Sometimes the wood spoils in the water, and you need to remove that mast. Get it out before it infects others. Because that mast has gone wrong. So you need to watch them. One of the interesting things when Admiral St. Vincent is doing his check of the various places, you know, that he's worried about infirm people and old people, one of the interesting things is he comes across the people who are responsible for maintaining the masts. And he considers them some of the laziest people, because as far as he's concerned, wherever he goes there, he just sees them sitting around all day. Or maybe going for a light swim. That's literally because that's their job. To check the mast, to go for that swim, to maintain that skill. And to be fair, they do have a solution for it, which is they literally do ask him to swim down in the water and try and assess the mast's quality. He doesn't find it very easy. He does give it a go, though. And that's one of the departments which he then supports the maintenance of, once he realizes how difficult their job is. Because the thing is, you don't want that pond to drain out and fill with the tide. It has to keep a constant depth. So it's not connected to the sea, so it doesn't clean naturally. So you have to try and clean it. Otherwise you have a build-up of algae and all sorts of stuff in there which will damage the wood. You have to try and keep it at the right level of salt and the right level of cleanliness. For everyone you need about 5 in pipeline. More than that. They're going to be down there for years. There's a debate throughout the period we're talking about of how to season them and then how long they're going to be down. We're starting this off back in 1511. If we look it up here, it's 1697 when they are building these in Chatham. Yes, there are others built earlier around the country. But the thing is, it's a debate for a long time. A very long time. We're rapidly getting through the history here, but the infrastructure needs to be in place. And it's not just the mast pond, it's not just the commissioner's house, there's also a ropery. You know, because you need rope. I've talked about the blockhouse. Producing the blocks. You also need the rope for the rigging. And by the way, the ropery still works. If you've got a ship, which you've got a sailing boat or anything where you need good quality, naturally made rope, hemp rope, you can order it from Chatham Dockyard. They keep it going. It's literally kept going thanks to commercial orders, thanks to people buying the rope from there. It's a very high quality wood, but it's highly in demand, but you can buy it. If you need good quality rope, if you want good quality natural fiber rope, go to them. Lions was trying to give an example, okay, probably more like 20. Yeah, it is more like 20. And then there's a reason I said there was a debate, because there was a debate. And if you think about it, think about how long HMS Victory's masts are and how many different pieces of mast they require cut to the same length to make up the height, and different height thicknesses to make up the height to go up the full mast. Because it's often not one continuous piece, one continuous trunk from base to height to tip. So just think about that. Yeah, having some good rope at home is always useful. And Dr. is another Chatham rope salesman. Well, I'm very lucky. I have some. I can't go get it at the moment because it's currently in use doing something for me and holding this house together in a part. But it's because currently I've just got it literally just arrived today, the system which I need to do to drill a hole through, to make a properly sealed hole in the wall for the Starlink cable to go through, has just arrived. So up until now, it's literally going through an open window, which is being held in the correct position by my rope, which is good quality Chatham rope. And you can go walk the Chatham rope walk. You can walk the whole distance. Me and Drac have done that a few times. It's fun. It's also good exercise. It really is. There's a reason they used to have bicycles for getting up and down it. There's also things like the Anchor Wharf storehouses there, which were built in 1788. No, 1778, to between 1778 and 1780, 1788, I think. And they were built over a 10-year sort of period, differently established. And they're the largest storehouses ever built for the Royal Navy. Now, please note, there is a codicil there. Storehouse. Once you start looking at warehouses, there are some pretty big structures built for the Royal Navy, believe it or not, to store things like ships' turrets from the Dreadnought era. But, in terms of storehouses, they are not wrong. If it's strictly defined as a storehouse, then technically the largest ones ever built are the Anchor Wharf ones in Chatham. Channel. Possibly this will answer later on in the video, but the Royal Navy incorporate anything from the ship managed navy. Well, I'm sort of giving the Royal Navy as an example of navies, but all the navies are basically developing something similar along similar times. They're all feeding off each other, developing their own things. One of the things we're going to get into at a certain point is the difference in cannon production for later types of cannon, but we'll get into that later. But pretty much every nation is picking up stuff from others. Some will do first. The hospitals are a good example. The French do hospitals far before the British do in terms of their military hospitals. The British then copy them and go, oh, these are good ideas for taking care of people. And then they spread them around the world. So there's lots of interplay going on. But the Royal Navy is a good one to give you because they're usually... One of the things Britain realises quite early on, and England before that, is that it's not as populous as France or Spain or these other nations in their times, and it's not able to call on the same human resources. So it needs to maximise the human resources it has. And one of the things it does is it looks at the infrastructure and support to make sure it can get the most out of its ships it can. Because ships, when they depend upon firepower, that's a skill. If you consider, we're talking about a battle of Slees, which the British do, the English do win, but it's a close run thing, and the French often do have a larger advantage because they usually put larger force in the field. The English managed to win that because they managed to concentrate their smaller force against one section of the French force and work their way up the line because the French have chained themselves in position so they can't move. The English never expect the French to be that helpful again. They never do. The Battle of Nile, they are not helpful again, but, it's a couple of 100 years later. These things happen, people forget. What you're pretty much looking for, what the English pretty much want, therefore, is to always try and maximise the capability of their smaller number of personnel, and naval power can do that for them. Because loading and maintaining artillery takes skill. It's far easier, if you have a small number of people, you concentrate on training those people to be as good as they can, so the quality can make up for the quantity. And in this case, the quality can give you a quantity of firepower, which can overwhelm quantity of numbers. Your equalizer is quality of personnel equaling providing quantity of firepower, affecting quantity of numbers. That's it. There's a reason why the Royal Navy is obsessed with training for generations. It's not just Nelson, it's not just St. Vincent, it's lots of admirals before them are obsessed with training. Because they don't have mass to fall back on. They never believe they're going to have mass to fall back on. It's the same for the Dutch. The Dutch have an interesting scenario though because they have the different admiralties, and sometimes those admiralties will be having fierce debates on how to do the infrastructure properly. And I mean absolutely fierce debates. They will just go completely overboard with, oh no, we do it this way by tradition. You do it that way by tradition. There's no question of which one's better. Oh no, this is our way, that's your way. And they will not stop, they will never agree on it. And this leads to problems with their ships, sometimes in infrastructure terms. It also leads to sometimes the ships, once they are on a faraway deployment, if they are from one admiralty and they know that another admiralty, actually their supplies or something are slightly better, some let's say, some little bargaining going on and some little trading. And, oh, well, you have those stores which are very good. We have these stores which are very good. Let's do some swapsies going on here. They are, after all, always very good merchants. And don't get me started on the Venetians. They are a beautiful example of this. Mala, I'm not sure what you're talking about in terms of the blocks, but the building, the block building, is no longer in use by a long way, and it's well into the middle of the Royal Navy dockyard in terms of the naval base. So no, there's no tours, there's no blocks being produced, there's nothing there. It's sitting there pretty much empty at the moment, as I understand it. It's been used for various different things since they stopped using it for blocks, but yeah, it's not producing anything. And then we have the Prince Royal. Now, this is the important point to start thinking about, because the Prince Royal is a very interesting ship. It really is. Now, when we say she's launched in 1610, we're not lying. And she ordered in 1607 and laid down in 1608. But officially, this vessel serves until 1666, when she's burnt by the Dutch. So officially, she serves 56 years. Okay? Again, nothing unremarkable. However, she starts off as being roughly 1,150 tons burthen. Pretty much thereabouts. She's then rebuilt in 1641 to 1,180 tons burthen. And in 1663, she's rebuilt again to 1,430 tons burthen. Just think about that. She starts off her life, when she's launched, as being 115 feet along the keel. That's 35 meters. After her 1663 refit, she is 132 foot along the keel. That's 40 meters. She also goes from having a beam of 43 foot 6 inches, that's 13.26 meters, to a beam of 45 foot 2 inches, that's 13.77 meters. And foremast was quite common for galleons, okay? The three-mast arrangement is what we're used to, but the galleon heritage can be seen in the foremast formation. She starts off as a 55-gun ship when she's built in 1610. 55 guns. Her 1663 rebuild rates her as a 92-gun first-rate ship of the line. Let's think about that. She starts off with 51 carriage-mounted heavy guns and 4 light port pieces. She finishes her career with 92 guns of various weights of shot, but still 92. By the way, she dies to the Dutch when she runs aground and gets basically surrounded by fire ships. And by all those who don't realise it, fire ships in the 1660s were pretty much the torpedo boats of their era. They were usually small, fast. They were chosen to be small, fast, and they'd set themselves ablaze and ran into ships and basically burn them. That was the plan. There are counters to those fire ships. There is a reason why fire ships stop being used in naval battles. There is a reason why fire ships stop being as effective. Kind of like what happens later with torpedo boats and various other things through history. People are always trying to tell me the same thing. Oh, our fleet of smaller ships will then annihilate those large ships. And sometimes they do if you're in enclosed scenarios and you're handling the large ships badly and you're not able to develop a counter in time, or you haven't been thinking about developing a counter, or your ships haven't been upgraded and have been let to basically rot, and then you suddenly sent them to war and they've suddenly got beaten up because they're not ready for it, then there are lots of problems. But usually, the example goes is these plans of using these small ships works right up until you bump into the first navy, which has actually been paying attention, has actually got somewhere in the region of funding. Because they usually will have a counter worked out well in advance, which will then smash your small ships. Now, this vessel therefore starts off as a frigate-built galleon. She does. She's a great frigate. She's got 4 masts, she's all these things. She's everything you could imagine her to be. And the thing is, she starts off being built by Phineas Pett. Phineas Pett. We're going to get to his name again soon. And then she's rebuilt by Peter Pett at Woolwich. Firstly, by the way, the first rebuild, which is great, takes her up to a 70 gun ship from 55 gun ship. You can also notice certain other things like, hang on, look at this bow chaser, look at how low the guns are to the waterline, and then look at the rest of the guns. Look, she's still maintaining some of the castle structures. Okay, the stern castle is no longer such a castle, it's far longer. Far more elongated. And yes, this was a painting of what she looked like in 1613 when she was arriving in Veselgen, Holland, painted in 1623, 10 years later, by Hendrik Conley's Room. But still, this is a good example of her. Look at this ship. You can see the cog history. You can see the frigate design from that way the bow is tapered. You can see what's coming in terms of great ships with the ornateness, but you can also see the history of the Clarkes. She would neither look out of place alongside Mary Rose, nor honestly many of the ships we see in reenactment we have seen today in terms of those historical galleons they like to build. So whilst the technology has moved on, it hasn't changed massively. And what you have to realise coming in is they're still getting guns of various calibre. It's not a uniform battery. It's still not a uniform battery. This is not the fleet, the romping, stomping fleet we would associate with the Age of Sail, with naval power, with a battle line. This is still very much learning its art, developing its art, and still having all these different guns. Right. With that being said, Shame's book plug. Now, did mention I was going to talk about some things when I got to the Shame's book plug. And I am. One of the things you might have noticed, and this is basically YouTube has copied Twitch to an extent. I'm not sure it's rolled out to my channel yet. I'm not sure if it has copied. I don't think it's reached my channel yet. But you might have heard something about hype. Okay? Coming from YouTube. So, on Twitch, you've had a hype train for quite a while. That's been a part of it. Well, YouTube has this thing called hype coming. I've already shared a link in the Masters of Arms channel for my admins to see on Discord. And one of them might share it in the rest of the server. And this is going to be important for anyone who's engaging with history channels or anything which is sort of less and not sort of mainstream. I'm not sure what mainstream is for YouTube, but, you know, not, something which is usually more marginally popular. Hype is going to be important because basically if a video is less than 7 days old, you're going to be able to hype it as the audience. You're going to be able to boost it and make it more likely to be seen. The more it gets boosted by the people who viewers, the more they like it, the more they share it, the more they press the hype button and go, basically that's you pushing it to be shared, the more it's going to get shared and pushed around. And that's great. There's a small problem with this. Everyone is going to be allowed, everyone who's signed up to YouTube, who's got a YouTube account, whether they're paid or not, is going to, as I understand, is going to be allowed free hypes per week. Unless you pay. Now, I have no idea if that money's if any of that money is going to come back to the creators or not. But to me, it does seem to be like it's a little bit of a push is going on by YouTube to try and find another pool to monetize things. But also, it's going to potentially push again against channels which have a lot of videos in their back catalog because they're not gonna those videos can't be hyped. And it's going to be another way that's going to push down probably videos which, if you're looking for videos from your traditional creators, you might get an idea of, I haven't seen a video pushed out by that creator in a while. Well, the reason you might not have seen it is because they've still been producing it, it just hasn't come up your feed because it hasn't been hyped enough. These things are coming. I expect them to come. It's a company. And the hype train has been a wildly successful thing for Twitch. When it happened during my really long video back in November when I did the 36 hours live, it really did boost to the Twitch viewership. That was when I've had the most Twitch viewers ever, was when the hype train was going. I peaked at something like 100 and something, which was really, really cool. YouTube is now trying to bring that in its own way. So I wanted to give you a heads up. I wanted you to say this. There's another reason why you might not see your favorite creator's video. You might not see it, and to go looking for it. But also that this is going to happen. As I said, I shared the link to the video in the Mastered Arm chat, and if anyone wants in the Discord server, I'm sure one of the Mastered Arms or Flotilla leaders, basically any of the admins will share it into the main chat for people to go and have a look at. But that's something to think about. There's also the reason why I keep doing premieres and why I'm trying to schedule premieres a long time in advance, because if I share a premiere at least 24 hours in advance, it gets a lot more viewers, but also premieres get boosted far more at the moment by YouTube than anything else. Again, not sure why, but the algorithm seems to be boosting them. And the thing is, what I do note with the channel, and everyone will notice watchers, is if you don't promote your channel, if you don't push it out a bit there, you have a choice. You're either big enough that they're automatically doing it for you, that the algorithm automatically does it for you because you're big enough, or eventually your channel's going to lose so many viewers you're going to drop out of it completely. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to keep on pushing it. But yeah, that's some of the things which are coming along, and thank you. Dutchman, could Mediterranean seawater be better? The season would. No. Actually, one of the interesting things about Mediterranean seawater is that, honestly, because of its temperature, because of the temperature in the Mediterranean Sea and the temperature of the waters around it, that would sometimes cause issues. And so they often would try and do things like, for the masts, to try and make sure they kept cooler. And at one point, they were experimenting trying to put ice there. I think it was it Venice which was getting ice from Switzerland? I know one of the city-states tried at one point ice from Switzerland to keep their mast pool cool. But yeah, it's all fun. Thomas Clarke, Vasa was one of the first with uniform battery. There is a problem with Vasa, and we'll be getting into that. Now, here is the interesting thing. I was actually just about to talk about Vasa anyway, so it makes sense to get to it now. Cast iron cannon. Now, these had started coming in 1543, when Henry VIII had managed to pay someone, a parson, to come up with a process of how to cast a iron cannon. Now, it takes a while to get going. It does. You need to set up the infrastructure. You need to set up the industries, and there needs to be the demand. And for a while, there isn't really a demand, because the thing is, bronze cannon are better in every single way. They are they are lighter, therefore easier to move. They are less bulky, therefore easier to move. And when they go wrong, they tend to crack rather than to go boom, therefore safer to use. That is all great advantages. However, iron is cheaper. And as you start building ships up, you want to have more and more cannon, because you're making them bigger, you want to make them more powerful. And you start to need more and more ships, because everyone's building larger fleets, and it's starting to matter. So therefore you need more guns. And the thing is, you can scale up iron production far easier than you can scale up bronze. This is the reality. Usually the figure you're given is that for every bronze cannon, you could buy 3 iron cannon. And that is true up until you start looking into certain issues. Once you realize the complexity of gathering enough bronze and producing enough material and getting it together, you find that to produce bronze cannon is going to take months, if not years longer, to produce the same amount than iron cannon. And realistically, the cost ends up going to 5 or 6. Or rather, between 20 and 15, that an iron cannon works out between 15 and 20% of the price of a bronze cannon. That makes a big difference. And here's why it makes a big difference. In 1794, the Royal Navy had 5 first rates in commission. That's 500 plus guns. 9 second rates in commission. That's between 720 and 882 guns, depending on which second rates they are. 71 third rates. That's roughly 5,254 guns, based on an average of them being a 74-gun ship, which was the vast majority of them. But some of them were 80-gun ships, and some of them were 64-gun ships. So, there's an error gun in there. There's 8 fourth rates in commission. That's 440 guns. And there's 134 fifth rates in commission, which is another between 4,288 and 5,896 guns. So all told, for the roughly 230 ships there, you have 12,000 guns. Think about that. 12,000 cannon. And that's just the ships in commission. That's just the cannon on the ships in commission. Not necessarily all the ships which are guard ships, which I've talked about. Some of them are special and that are not actually included with the Royal Navy's commissioned ships. There are fortress guns. There are guns in storage, guns going through maintenance, guns for the ships which are in ordinary, not in commission. And guns wear out. Guns have to be replaced, rebored, repaired. There are figures which put the Royal Navy's actual gun usage and the estimate and running costs at roughly 20 to 30,000 cannon. Now, think about that difference if you're using them all bronze cannon versus if you're using iron cannon. And think about the cost differential. You see, that's the thing. Iron's far more easily accessible, and one of the big it's the big advantage England has. England is far better able to produce cannon than the Mediterranean countries for quite a while, because of the quality of iron and other materials it has access to. And this is the real cost. I've already spoken about the cost of cannon, in relation to tapestries for Henry VIII. Well, think about all that cost. Think about how much infrastructure has to go into supporting that amount of cannon. Think about how much work has to go into supporting that amount of cannon. And by the way, included in the number of the 30,000 figures, when you start including all the sick freights, all the unrated ships, all the various forts, etc. you have around the world, and it's just immense. The sheer volume of cannon you have to deal with. We are used to thinking of warfare as a mass production, mechanization of mass production is war, as being something First World War and onwards. Well, guess what? I'm sorry, cannon. Because nearly every country which had a navy, in fact, all the countries which had a navy, but especially the ones which actually had a big, serious navy, had to do this. The big problem for the US when it comes to getting their ships, and one of the reasons why the Senate is always worried about whether they should invest in large ships of the line, etc., and then don't do it, is because of forging cannon in the quantity required. Because it costs money. And because once you've set up those foundries to do that in the volume you need to get those, then you either keep them going and keep them in production and keep building stuff, or that's just money which goes away. It's gone. It's over. It's no more. That's your choice. And yes, they have to be cast with thicker barrels than bronze ones, because when iron cannon go wrong, they have a habit of blowing up. When bronze cannon go wrong, they fracture. Iron cannon go boom! Colin Cameron, easy access to Scandinavian iron ore? Not really. The mass Scandinavian iron ore we're talking about is not something which would really is a thing in the 18th and 17th centuries. Yes, they have it, but it's not going to be the exploitations which is going to come later on. And the UK has a lot of its own iron ore. The UK has pretty good quality iron itself. There's a whole discussion about that, Colin Cameron. Basically, there are a couple of priests employed by Henry VIII. Some of them are English, some of them are Italian, and depends which history books you read, which are the most important. But the odds are it kind of works. They managed to work it out together. It's not necessarily an individual person. And I'm not doing a video about the history of cast iron cannon, so I'm not going to get into the whole debates about which person I think developed it more than the others, because I sit there and go, I'm fairly sure this was one of those occasions where it was a bit of a team effort. But the thing about history is they like to award credit. And while some people certainly have the ideas and the theories, the person who had the theories didn't know had a lot of great theories, but didn't have necessarily a lot of casting knowledge, and the people they were working with had more knowledge of casting. So I put it therefore as a fusion rather than a single person, if that makes sense. Because the casters wouldn't have worked it out without the theoretical of the theoretical, and the theoretical wouldn't have been able to make it reality without the casters. Yeah, it's kind of like when we consider Nobel Prizes. The Nobel Prizes usually go to the experimental physicists who prove it, rather than the theoretical physicists who come up with the ideas. And in many ways it should be shared, in my mind. It should be shared. It tends to be generally more to go to the experimentals who prove it, though. I think lately it started being more often shared, but it certainly have a history of going to. Whereas with the iron cannon, I think in my experience, the history seems to tend to focus on the theoreticals rather than the practicals, and I think it needs to encompass both. But as I said, there's another video about that. So, one of the things you have going on here is these ships are changing to take these cannon. Now, you also have to design the cannon, therefore the ships to be strong enough to take the weight of cannon. I did mention I was going to talk about Avasa here. Now, there was an interesting paper produced a few years ago, which I don't know. When I say produced, it circulated around academics. I'm not sure if it was ever published. But it was basically a historian had done the maths, and they reckoned that if you had iron guns on the lower deck and you had bronze guns on the upper deck for the Vasa, it would have been enough differential that she wouldn't have suffered the fate she did. Now, with that being the case, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think the differential is enough. But it's an interesting idea to think about. There is certainly a significant differential between the two in terms of the overall weight, in terms of the weight of carriage, and in terms of the weight of how you support them. This is also the start at which cannons start to become more standardized. As you start producing more cannon, you're going to want to standardize them, because one of the troubles is iron cannon are not pieces of art. Bronze cannon are pieces of art. Iron cannon are tools to kill. Tools of destruction at best point, tools to kill at the worst. There is a difference going on here. If you look at these cannon, you see they've got a stamp on the top, maybe, but otherwise they are standardized. Now, these cannon have to be recreations sitting in board HMS Victory, but the cannon there would have not looked dissimilar. They've made these recreations of fiberglass and various things to make it lighter for the hull, so the hull, you're putting less pressure on the hull in its old age. Which is a good thing to preserve the ship. And gives you an idea of what the ship really looked like, what the sights would have been as you wandered down. What the crew would have seen. What they don't give you is the idea of it being absolutely packed. Because HMS Victory would have had 800 people aboard. Given the propensity to rebuild on historical sites, it does make me wonder, I'll come with Cameron, how many Iron Age and Roman Iron Age mines were dug out completely for the iron cannons? Oh, my dear boy. There are so many of them. Sorry, I sound like my granddad then, but that is a question I would have asked my granddad, and I gave the granddad response. Yeah, they're just... Yeah, as long as the iron mine was still producing, it was being used. Believe it or not, the British do not have a habit of throwing away things like iron mines. They're useful. And so this brings us to the Royal James. And now if we consider her from 1675 and compare her to the Prince Royal, what do we notice the difference of? We already see multiple gun decks. Now the hull itself is providing the height. You don't need the castles necessarily provide height. Yes, they have a little bit. They still do have certainly castle bits, but they're far less pronounced parts of the hull, far less pronounced parts of the shaping. And she's 3 masts. Take care, Jonathan Moon. She's certainly becoming far more ship of the line-esque. She really is. And the Royal James is a good-looking ship. She's a capable ship. She's a useful ship. But there is also a point of, there is a Royal James which was launched in 1671, which then burnt in 1672. Literally participated in the Battle of Solebay and burnt. So they built another one. and she was launched in 1675. She's renamed HMS Victory in 1691. Now, she's originally armed with 100 cannon of various weights of shot, is what we call. But she does start to have a standardization. She has the heaviest cannon on the lowest gun deck. Then she has slightly lighter cannon on the next higher gun deck, and then on her third gun deck she has her lightest cannon. Now, when she first enters service in 1675, she displaces 1,421 tons burthen. Now, tons burthen is useful. Gives you a slight idea of how much a ship is, in terms of what it can carry. It doesn't really tell you everything about a ship, though. What's interesting is that, well, after a 1695 rebuild, roughly 20 years later, it's amazing how many ships have a great rebuild every 20 years in their service. You might have started picking up on that pattern now. She's gone up to 1,486. She puts on roughly 65 tons of burthen in capacity. She still has 100 guns. She's still a fully rigged ship. Her beam expands by roughly 4 inches. Her hold expands by a couple inches in depth. But why? Why does she expand? Why does this happen? Well, it's to fit the new standards. It's to fit the new guns. You see, not only do guns go up in size, the size of shot you want to fire from them goes up as well. And as the size of shot increases that you want to fire from them, the size of the gun has to go up, and therefore the weight of the gun goes up. And this causes a never-ending cycle of needing a bigger, tougher ship. Because if you don't have a big enough, tough enough ship, you're going to end up in trouble. Now, if you don't mind, I need to get some air freshener. Oh, good God, dog, what do we feed you? Good Lord. Where did I put it? There it is. Yes, you can wag your tail. What do we feed you? Oh. You can look cute now. I honestly believe if concentrated enough, it could be weaponized. It could be weaponized. Okay. Where was I? So, this is basically a proto-ship of the line. It's starting to get towards that capability. It's not quite on the standardized methodologies we'd understand, but it's starting to get there. It's starting to believe that policy. And she's a good ship. She's broken up and destroyed in sort of 1721 after she has an accidental fire aboard. Technically, she's supposed to be rebuilt as the new HMS Victory, which is not the Victory we have still sitting in the dockyard. No, that's another ship entirely. But you know, she has a good life, a good service life, you could say, because theoretically she serves from 1675 to 1721. So, 46 years, roughly. Give or take a couple of few months. That's a good service, isn't it? She did go through the names, not just Royal James, but also Royal George, after the Hanoverians come to power. And, you know, it's always fun to have those names around. She serves Britain well. Is she a particularly good sailing ship? No. But she's 100 guns. She's a 100-gun first-rate ship of the line, and she is the status asset of her time. And she has a higher freeboard and lower, and to the extent some of the gun ports are, being raised up, because one of the things you have happening in this time period is these ships are expected to be sailing far more often. They're expected to be sailing across the Bay of Biscay. They're expected to be sailing into the Mediterranean. They're expected to be sailing to the American colonies starting to come in as a factor of their deployment. They're expected to be sailing to places they could be needed to go to. And if you're having to do these across these rough seas, they need to be capable. And you start to get standardization coming in. Now, standardization is an interesting thing to have coming in, because this is where we start hearing about these 42-pounders, etc. Now, please note, what I'm going to tell you now is going to shock you. But a British pound is not the same as a French pound or a Spanish pound. In fact, they're so different that if you are on a French 42-pounder, it's going to be a very different gun to a British 42-pounder or a Spanish 42-pounder. In fact, logistically, they're practically impossible to transmute across. There has often been a discussion about the cannonballs being transferred between navies. Hasn't there? There has. And as Raleigh here would certainly tell you all about, there has never really been, though, a time where that's really been possible. You take what you can to fire it, but it's made possible by wadding and other things thanks to the quality of the gun crew. It's not really something which is an easy plug and play, it's an adapt and play. Do we understand it? Right? Raleigh knows about these things, after all he is called Raleigh. Some of his background has this knowledge and this skill. Isn't that true? That is true. Poodle's definitely silent but deadly. Now, how do the British get this standardization? Well, what they do is Brigadier General Michael Richards, who's the Master General of the Ordnance Board, is so fed up with the issues of trying to work out culverins, demi-culverins, and all the various things, and getting them made to some kind of standardization when everyone claims that there's differences and theirs is better, he starts going, right, then I need a method of standardization. Okay? Standardization we're going to go for? Weight of shot, which people can't argue with. And he gets a Danish colonel called Albert Bogard to come and run this and set this up. Now, it's all based on the weight of a single shot fired by the cannon. So when we go down them, we've got the 6-pounder, roughly 3.5 inch. Got the 8-pounders, roughly 4 inch. 12-pounders, 4.7 inch. 4.7 inch is something which turns up so often with the Royal Navy. They love their 12-pounders, they love their 4.7 inch. It happens a lot. 18-pounder, that's your 5-inch gun. The Americans and their love for 5 inches. 24-pounder, 5.5 inch gun. 32-pounder, 6.4 inch gun. Starting to sound a bit French, everyone here? 36-pounder, 6.7 inch gun. That's a nice, but also shows how quickly they go up in weight with only a little increase in size, because that's the difference between a 6.4 inch and a 6.3 inch is 4 pounds of weight in terms of the ball. 4 pounds of weight. And then a 42-pounder is 7 inches. So that's gone up another 6 pounds in 0.3 of an inch. There's a differential going on here, isn't there? There's a differential going on here. Now, What does this standardization offer you? Well, it means you can start ordering guns by batch and by bulk. There is no surprise that by 1712 you have this implemented, and 82 years later you have all those thousands of guns in service. Because now there's no, oh, my version of a culverin is this, my version of a demi-culverin is this, or my version... No, I want 232-pounder cannon. Well, no, they have to be able to fire a 32-pounder ball. If they can't fire a 32-pounder ball, then they ain't being bought by me. That is what I want. And they have to be able to fire that at this range. Oh, for God's sake. Poodles. Oi. Rumble. Hello, yes. I realise you want attention now. You are lovely. Ugh. And the thing is, you start working through what you're going to have. One of the reasons why you have the long 9 turn up, why does a 9-pounder, the long 9 come up? Well, because the 9 is the largest gun you can build for the length you require to be a chasing gun and mount it high up in the ship, because if you build anything bigger, let's say you try to do a long 12 or something like that, it's going to be too much weight at that height and going to cause you issues with managing it, with crewing it, with organising it and preparing it. Can you please stop licking my... Stop it. Stop it. Ow. Oh, why do you have to put paw there? I don't know, you're just abusing your papa this evening. Just abusing them. And also, and I will emphasize this, also the other advantage is, it also allows you to start bulk ordering shot cannonballs, which are just as difficult to order and just as much you need to get. Think about it, for every cannon you probably need to order 200 to 300 balls per ship. Think about just how many balls that is you order. We're literally talking millions. Millions of them. No, you've already had them. You're not getting more. You're not getting more. You're a good boy. Now, I think he wants garden. I'll be back in a second. I do apologise. I'm going to guess that's what the chemical assault and now physical assault is about. Although he took a while to actually lead me to the door. Ronnie, going garden. Big boy. I know. No. Okay. She'll come get him, won't she? Yes, he's had all his food. You make me go out in the cold with you, and then you race in and leave me out in the cold. Wait, you're just being cruel to your papa this evening. You're just being cruel to your papa. It's just cruelty to papa. Poodle can read. Yes, the poodle can read. He has started working out what PT means. Don't worry, there's also KT and CT, and they both know what it means as well. Using the pounder classification, how would a 15-inch 42 be called? I'd have to work that out. But what's really important here is to remember, these cannon are limited by how much an individual person can lift. That's it. They are limited by how much an individual person can lift. So you all want to be serving on a 6-pounder gun crew, okay? That's going to be... That's enough to give you a bit of an arm workout, not enough that it's going to cause the sheer volume you're going to do, not enough that you're going to wrench yourself. Whoever has the job of picking up a 42-pound ball. If you've ever picked up medicine balls, and I'm not sure what the standard weight of a medicine ball is from my memory. I mean, just check that up. You can get them in various sizes, but I think 2.2 pounds in a kilogram, so roughly a 20-kilogram medicine ball. If you want to have a go picking up a 20-kilogram medicine ball, be my guest. And then think about it that you're going to have to pick it up and load it every 60 seconds for hours on end. And then think about how strong you have to be. And by the way, in between you loading it, you then have to run the cannon forward and get it positioned so it can fire, and then it'll come back, and then you have to clean it, load it, and do it all again. And remember, the Royal Navy wants to be able to salvo as quickly as they can. Would they rotate them in? Nope. You each have your task. Believe it or not, it's kind of, there are certain people in certain roles you never want to get in a fight with. Their descendants there were some British missile systems in the early 1960s, the Sea Slug and the Sea Cat especially, which required manual loading in certain positions where they're in. I swear the guys who lifted those missiles into place must have been built like frickin' cranes. That's the only way to explain it. And I've seen photos of them. There are people in this world I might think I can get in a fight with and stand a chance because of training and experience and all the other things I've had. Those are not them. They are not them. If they have a problem with me, I will concede and move out the way. They are literally... They make Arnie Schwarzenegger at his peak look like he's barely evolved. I'm surprised more bodybuilders didn't work out that their trick to be having their perfectly sculpted body, join the Royal Navy and start lifting the missiles around. Because if you can shift those things, you're gonna get ripped. Well, it's rather the same with the gun crew. You can usually tell who the loader is. He's also the guy who, if you're boarding the ship, you really don't want to be the other end of. There are lots of rumours about the IJN, but they're not true. The 5.5-inch gun was actually kind of popular, and HMS Hood was using 5.5-inch guns. There's actually a goodly chance the Royal Navy ends up picking 5.5-inch as its dual-purpose weapon for destroyers at one point. And honestly, if they had, it would have been a very interesting scenario, because if they had gone through and standardized on 5.5 inch in the 1920s with hood, etc., and that had been the standard secondary, there's a very good chance that the 5.5 inch secondary is what you then get on all the carrier, on the battleships, and all the battleships, and you don't get this 5.25 and 4.5 and all the mixtures. You just get standardized on 5.5. But the thing is, it wasn't fast enough firing. It was felt with manual loading. The 4.7 was just that bit faster. That was good. And you never want to take a left hook from a B-24 pilot. The left arm was used to hold the yoke and pull several square feet of metal into a 200 mile per hour airstream. Yeah, I heard about them. Take a right hook. Don't volunteer for a left. Oh. We also have standardization going on in terms of the whole ships. Now, this is an interesting thing because it doesn't last. By the time you get to HMS Victory, the one we're discussing, you do not have the establishments anymore. But at this point, they start to establish the first proper establishment. Now, they've had standardized designs before, but they've been for runs of ships. Just this many ships will be run, and that many ships will be to run, and we'll just do this many ships, and we'll build them to this standard. The establishment of an establishment means you're establishing standard models which go to every single shipyard. This is how we want you to build the ships. So if we want you to build a 90-gun ship, this is what you build. If you want to build an 80-gun ship, this is what you build. If you want to build a 70-gun ship, this is what you build. This is what we want the ships to look like. It's trying to standardize across the fleet. It's standardizing for logistical reasons, it's standardizing for operational reasons, for training reasons, but it's standardization. And it's something which is really cool, because it's the first approach to what we would call classes, and trying to build classes of ships which are being built at multiple different yards. Here are designs, here are models. You can build from this. This design model has been built by this yard. This design model has been built by this yard. Each yard's built to their own specifications, their skills. And producing this sort of system allows you to grow the capability and skills and knowledge quite quickly across your yards. It allows you to spread the information quite quickly, because you can spread best practice by, this is the establishment and this is why. Same here. Also, every sailor would find their way around each ship of each class. Don't take this the wrong way, Seneca Nero, but honestly, these ships are not that complicated to find their way around that that's ever really a consideration. It's really not a consideration. I was considering putting some plans in this video. I didn't put plans in here. The reason is because quite a lot of these spaces in here are very much open spaces. If we go back to this one, here's the example. Main gun deck. I'm not going to get lost in that. The main differential between them is the decks, not anything else. You're not going to get lost in this scenario. It also gives you something for your constructors to check against. Yes. It allows you to really start to build your fleet up and to start to work your fleet through. I guess it was half said in jest, but I wanted... The thing is, with the chat, what I always do is make sure that if there are things in the chat which are said in jest, but could be taken by someone else who maybe doesn't have the experience or background reading on the subject to be true, I correct it as quickly as I can. As nicely as I can, but correct it as quickly as I can, so they take it so they don't pick it up as knowledge and doesn't get repeated. There are some fun things going on, and I will probably do a little bit at the end, and I'll go into my comments and I might save it for. I think I'll probably save it Scuttlebutt 9 actually. But there have been some interesting comments lately, which I think there are bots going around trying to make people look like trying to make Americans look like idiots on the things at the moment, and yeah. Yeah, there are some interesting people who seem to be out there who seem to be trying to draw everything that comes up into some very strange debates. But we'll do it. We'll leave that be. I'm not sure why, but I have noticed recently the number of trolls in comment section has been on the increase. People who seem to want to try and pick weird fights in weird sections. Now, exactly, and stuff. It's why raking was such a horrific action, because there's nothing in there to stop. There is nothing in there to stop the fire once it gets in. And nothing in there to stop. Also, raking, what it tends to do, the biggest damage from raking, is it will upset carriages and upset cannon, and those things will crush. They will crush and maim their crews. So the cannonballs, if they ripple down from the front or from the bow or the stern, can upset guns and really kill their crew. Which, again, why you have the line of battle, why you have all those things. Now, standardization and establishments are useful. They are not around forever. They are gone by the time of HMS Victory. They really are gone by the time of HMS Victory. By the time of HMS Victory, they're no longer going with standardization. They have constructors, and they're overseeing the designs, and they're keeping people to design. But they've established the standard level of knowledge by that point. They spend roughly 50 years making sure there is a certain level of knowledge within the naval dockyards, within the yards of producing ships for the Navy, so that they understand where they're coming from, that there's a depth of industrial knowledge, a depth of institutional memory there that can support their construction and support their choices. And then you can build from that. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a conscious effort to do that, but it certainly is a beneficial factor they do. I think at the time it was more a conscious effort to raise the quality of construction across the British Isles. Again, it's that old problem of we need to maximize our people. We need to maximize their capabilities. We need to maximize every capability we get from them. And for that, we need the tools to do it. The other advantage of standardization is cost. Why is it advantageous? Because it means when you get asked for a ship, you know what ship you're getting. You know what you're paying for. And if someone tries to skimp and overcharge to try and make profits, you can very easily spot it. Oh. Now, having now visited Victory and seen the thickness of the collapsible walls of the cabin, it does make you think, oh yeah, those walls are privacy screens. They're not sound screens or anyway. In a nicest way, also remember, as I've said before, there are women aboard these ships. Officers do bring their wives, so do some of the senior chiefs and senior NCOs. There are children literally being born in some of the battles. Okay? There is little to no privacy on these vessels. Doesn't matter if you have your own space. Basically, all your own space serves for, all your own space gives you, is the ability to read at night and do your paperwork at night as an officer. There ain't much privacy on a ship. Well, one of the reasons why I think they sent out the models is because they can. One of the interesting things is, at certain points, the naval dockyards found they had more people who could read blueprints than could actually read words. Really interesting piece of history comes forward when you. I've got a friend of mine who's done some educational studies, and a book's coming out at some point, hopefully, on it. And pretty much the whole research has been on the educational attainment level of dockyards and the personnel in them, and it was found by the Navy at various points in their own assessment of it that their officers and the men who work in dockyards could frequently read blueprints and plans, but couldn't read words. If you gave them a letter, they wouldn't know what it was saying. But if you gave them a diagram, they could tell you where it went on a ship and what you did with it and how you did it. So, Runon, yes. Are you telling me that a 1700s yard worker had a better comprehension than my foreman? Yes. 1700s yard worker could probably work out the blueprint far better than your foreman could, but your foreman could hopefully write a letter better than the 1700s yard worker. Wives were nurses in battle, most likely. The wives were all sorts of things in battle. They really were all sorts of things. It's all sorts of, as I've talked before about the informal admiral staffs. Gets more interesting once you start going below decks and working out what's going on. Again, it's more normal, I have to admit, on the bigger ships. Okay, so don't. One of the things that's trouble is people start looking and going, well, I can't find them on this frigate. No, on the smaller ships it's less common. But on the big ships of the line, especially the ones doing long-term operations in terms of blockades, etc., yeah, you could quite often find wives and daughters on there. You haven't seen his text messages. Okay, well, there's a possibility. There's a possibility. There's a possibility he'd failed the exam then for various positions in the dockyard. So, I thought I'd put up HMS Vanguard here of 1678. Please note, this is not her in 1678. This is not. She's a classic example of what we're going to be what we're talking about, because she's otherwise known at various points as HMS Duke. She starts off as a 90-gun second-rate of the ship of the line, 1,482 tons burthen, launched 1678. She's broken up in 1769. She's renamed HMS Duke in 1739. But here is the fun. She's built with 90 guns of various weight. Then when she's rebuilt in 1710 to the 1706 establishment, this is not her picture then, she's rebuilt again as a 90-gun second-rate ship at a time. This point, she's now armed with 26 32-pounders, 26 18-pounders on the middle deck, 26 32-pounders on the gun deck, by the way, the lower deck, 26 18-pounders, 26 9-pounders on the upper deck, 10 6-pounders on the quarter deck, and 2 6-pounders on the forecastle. Okay, that's fine. That's all good. She's then rebuilt again in 1739 to the 1733 proposed establishment. That's a modification of an earlier establishment. And she's again going to be a 90-gun ship. Now, it's worthwhile noting that she starts off with a gun deck of 48.8 meters long, 160-foot long gun deck. Her 1710 rebuild takes it up to 162 foot. That's a 49.4 meters long gun deck. Her 1739 rebuild will take her gun deck up to 174 foot. That's 53 meters. So she has grown through rebuilds a whopping 4.2 meters over her life, but she's still the same ship. She's also grown from 1,482 tons burthen to 1,625 tons burthen. And her beam has increased something dramatic as well. She's gone from 44-foot beam as she was built to 50-foot beam as she's rebuilt in 1739. She's still carrying 90 guns though. 26 32-pounders, 26 18-pounders, 26 9-pounders, 10 6-pounders on the quarterdeck, and 2 6-pounders on the forecastle. So she's growing bigger, but her guns are staying the same at this point. She's growing more powerful, I would argue. She's got a lot more space. And she's a gorgeous ship, and, you know, she's not alone in these upgrades. She's certainly not alone in these upgrades. In fact, some ships, Boyne, for example, which is an 80-gun third-rate ship of the line, goes through them at exactly the same time, as does Cumberland. It goes through pretty much the same modifications. I really wish we had stats for the percentage of original timbering ships when left service. Lions, I haven't yet brought up the Ship of Theseus thought experiment for this video, because honestly, if I do, that's hitting it too much on the nose. Okay? That is not a thought experiment. That is a day in the life of, or rather the life expectancy of a Royal Navy Age of Sail ship. They are all ships of Theseus. They just don't let it start. They just don't change. Now, this ship, therefore, evolves. Now, one of the reasons why it evolves and gets bigger is because it's always described as a fully rigged ship. But guess what? Its masts get bigger. The amount of canvas they're carrying gets greater. The speed it can therefore do gets more. This vessel participates in the battles of Barfleur and La Hogue in 1692. Which is pretty much in her original form. She takes part in that battle as part of Edward Russell's fleet. And I've talked about Edward Russell before. He's a capable officer. She has an interesting career. She also saw action at the Battle of Quiberon Bay. At Quiberon Bay, she does some heavy fighting. And of course, Quiberon Bay, that is under another great part of his Royal Navy history, Sir Edward Hawke. Now, you could argue whether she was or wasn't the same ship. And I'd argue that what the difference is between being a rebuild and building a new ship is building a rebuild is we are using at least some of the wood of the old ship, which saves some of the cost. But pretty much a great rebuild is getting you a new ship. It is getting you a new ship. Some of them, like the HMS Victory we earlier discussed with the Royal James, I think that was the Victory one, that is just a new ship, okay? That really is just a new ship. But they put a lot of effort into preserving wood. They put a lot of effort into seasoning wood. And if the wood was well maintained and was fine, they could use it. Now, hull wood is often the first and most likely to rot and go wrong. Okay? That's usually the wood which they have to watch the most. especially the wood which is caught between the air on one side and the sea on the other the whole time. That is wood they have to be very careful about, because that's in the worst of both worlds. Remember, when they season it, they fully submerge masts to draw out all the stuff in them, which is going to cause the sap and the other issues, which are going to cause them problems when they're being masked, but keep them still springy to take the weight of being a mast, and the tensions of the sails. But being caught between salt water on one side and air on the other side, never good. It's part of the reason why copper bottoming them when it comes in, and again, it's something you can do because of the infrastructure, the organisation. Why is it the Royal Navy can copper bottom its ships quite so quickly and quite so effectively, whereas the French can't? And the Spanish can't at the same level? It's because of the level of organisation and infrastructure they have behind them, but also because, honestly, both of those powers are involved in heavy land wars which are tapping out their strength and their focus. Whereas for the Royal Britain, the Royal Navy is it. As I've explained, and as we all know, we're talking about an organisation in terms of the dockyards on par with what the NHS is today in terms of its percentage population mass, and the Indian railways. Huge organisations. Labyrinthine organisations. Organisations prone to all sorts of variants across them. But once fully mobilised, are capable of accomplishing huge feats because of their sheer size and will when they need to. Dutchman, how would captured ships be standardised? They literally be rebuilt according to establishments. And sometimes you can do that quite easily, because also you can try and reshape the wood. They can work with the wood. They can re-steam it. They can reset it. They can try and shape it. If it's good quality wood, they could be able to do it again. If they need to replace it, they replace it. That's one of the advantages when you're not ordering wood per ship. You're ordering wood to the store. The Royal Navy's not ordering the resources per ship. You have to remember that. The Royal Navy isn't ordering wood. Oh, we're building a ship, so we're going to order some wood now. No, the Royal Navy has an ongoing process with its Navy board of wood being ordered and delivered to the shipyards and stored and seasoned. Some of it's being dried, some of it's being stored in salt water. There are huge stockpiles of wood. Massive stockpiles of wood. They are colossal fire hazards. There's a reason some of the earliest fire machines and fire engines and fire fighting squads are in the naval dockyards. Because there are huge covered stores to allow this wood to dry and season and settle. So, yeah, they ask for money to build a specific ship, but you're not paying for the components. This is another thing which often makes the costs interesting to work out, because as you're already buying all the materials, and the materials are already going to be in the yard, the cost of the ship is literally just the workers doing the building, who you're probably going to pay anyway because they're naval dockyard. So at a certain point, the cost of the ships becomes almost moot. And that explains why the Royal Navy dockyards, even in peacetime, are basically constantly just building stuff. Constantly building, rebuilding, because it makes sense. And tar, yes, well, there's also his tar there, but, you know. And hemp. Hemp for ropes. Old ropes for caulking. There's just non-stop stuff which is flammable. And we've already mentioned them a bit, but I feel that it's sort of worthwhile talking about the resident commissioners at Chatham. It starts off being almost a family tradition, and they are sometimes, it is literally a family tradition. You'll find the family members setting it up, and for its first few years, for the first years of Chatham, from 31 to 68, 37 years, It's the pets. For 37 years, it's the pets. They build and rebuild ships. They're commissioners at Chatham and Woolwich. They're based at Chatham. They also occasionally deal stuff at Woolwich. And the family is spread all around the country, running the Royal Navy's dockyards. And the thing is, you need someone to live on site who you trust. And who better to trust with it than someone whose livelihood and life depends on that dockyard working? Because if that dockyard turns out bad ships, they're going to lose everything. I once spoke with someone who honestly said, well, it's a great, bonus having your house provided by the government when you're dockyard. It's a perk of the job. It's not a perk of the job, really. It looks like a perk because you don't have to buy your own house. But let's think about it. You muck up and get fired, you're going to lose your house. Now, the thing is, you could muck up and get executed. That's another option. But either way, that means your family are going to lose their house. They're going to be thrown out on the streets. They're going to be destitute. Maybe they have other family members who'll take them in. Maybe they don't. But suddenly your incentive to make sure the job is done to a level which is at least acceptable enough that you can't be blamed if anything goes wrong becomes very high once you start considering consequences of your actions. Some interesting discussions going on in the chats at the moment. I'm trying to keep track of them, but honestly, some of them I've lost track of, so I will just get in at various points. Now, there's a chain of these personnel who go throughout history. I'm not going to get into all of them because at some point I'll probably do videos about them, and they might come up in the key leaders, they might come up in another discussion of the dockyards, and I might do video on the people who ran the dockyards and for each dockyard do a video about it. I'm considering doing a year of infrastructure, but there are certain things I need to do. One, I need to have this channel earning enough money that I can do far more trips around the country to do it, and probably some international trips as well. Not too far away. I'm talking mostly Europe for the early infrastructure. Probably America, most of the infrastructure seems to have been plated over and disappeared already. So I'm not sure how much I can get from going to there, but that's sort of the thing I want to do. But to do that, I'll also do videos of videos of these people, discussing these different leaders. And I've worked out what level I need to be at the channel for a year of infrastructure to work at. It needs to be about 30,000 subscribers, based on that being roughly double the income I get now, which would be roughly enough to sustain the costs of those flights. Yes, I am that sad I've worked out these options enough time in advance. You'd lose both, Stafford. You'd lose your life and your house. You might lose your house and your job. That's one thing. But you also could lose your life. And your family still lose their house. So yeah. For these personnel, building these ships becomes critical. Making sure they are done well, making sure they're done correctly. And one of the things I do love is I love this one of Peter because it shows what he feels was his greatest ship next to him. And these are not people for whom there is a huge amount written. There should be more. There really should be more. but there isn't. If you type in Peter Pet, you're going to get Peter Pettigrew come up. That's literally what you will do. But, and by the way, when you start to realise that the pets are a very long-lived family in terms of service to Britain as shipwrights, we can date it back to Phineas's father at least, who was also called Peter, and he seems to have been working on ships as early... Well, let's put it this way. The Pet Dynasty is around for a long time. A long time. Possibly have been were working on Royal Navy ships for roughly 200 years. But this is Sovereign of the Seas, by the way. This is Sovereign of the Seas, the stern of Sovereign of the Seas, which was considered one of the most glorious ships ever to put to sea. And also, after she was lost to the Dutch, after the Dutch raid on the Medway, the British learned their lesson. And, yeah, their ships were painted well and were glorious, but were never quite that glorious ever again. His father made the plans, but his father couldn't build the ship. So Peter built the ship. He built his father's ship. Now, I would argue one of the most important people to side with the Parliament in the Civil War, in the War of the Three Kingdoms, as we sometimes call it in the UK, was Pett, because he was the Commissioner of Chatham Dockyard in 1648. And when the war breaks out in 1649, he stays on the side of Parliament and stays as Commissioner at Chatham Dockyard. And he is critical to keeping their fleet at sea. And so he becomes a member of Parliament at various points. He's very well looked after. He's also the person who prepares the fleet to go and accompany the return of Charles II. And he managed to keep a good relationship with Charles II. However, he does lose out after the Chatham raid. In 1667, he gets blamed for the issues at Chatham and the fleet being failed to be towed to safer up the river. Because he saved the models rather than the ships. He was actually asked why he did save his models. And his argument was that the models were more valuable. This led to a huge amount of laughter. But he said that without the models, it's impossible to build new ships, as it's not possible to build ships just from drawings alone. You need to have the 3D model to accurately shape the ship, because there's only so much you can learn from a diagram on a piece of paper or on the great drawings they put out. You need the model. He's basically made the scapegoat. But they do keep his models, because the models are critical for building ships. And this, to me, always shows the value of, we can build this fleet, but we can only build this fleet because we have the designers and the information we've built up behind it, because we have these models. This is the point of the establishment of these things. It's building up these designs, and, well, Pett is a fine example of it. But yeah, he loses his house, he loses everything after that. He's managed to survive the Civil War, he's managed to survive the interregnum, he's managed to survive various royal families, but yeah, he gets the blame for the Dutch getting up to Chatham when he is not the naval guy. He's not the military guy. He's not the guy in charge of the forces. His job is to look after the yard and build ships and maintain ships. That's what he's there for. He needs that. He was asleep.
Thank you.
And considering he wasn't whiffing or whinging, I left him asleep.
His girlfriend today.
Yeah, he did see his girlfriend today. Sorry, Poodle went to the vets today. What is the oldest surviving Royal Navy model? Well, how do I put that? That is again something which is open for debate, because there's a discussion over who exactly has the oldest surviving model. If we go back to this picture, this one from the 1706 establishment is surviving. There are supposedly some from the earlier plans surviving as well. So, we're talking about Sovereign of the Seas. Well, let's talk about Royal Sovereign, because she's another interesting ship and gives us a status of these vessels at this point. She's the progenitor of the 1719 establishment. She's built, though, in 1701. And Royal Sovereign is one of those vessels which has a very intriguing little career. Raleigh's doing fine. He went to the vets because, well, honestly, this is going to sound silly. He went to the vets for his ears. His ears, as you know, I've been doing medication and putting medication in them, and they are getting better. But honestly, it's an ongoing thing. But he's fine. He's a lot better than he was with his ears. They aren't smelling as much. The trouble is when you have poodles, because they have such long ears and they have such long fur, the wool grows thick inside the ears and that can clog them up. And okay, so this is some problem. There used to be a thing that that the groomers would pluck their ears, would basically pull the hair out, and yes, it does hurt, but it stopped them getting ear infections. And so I didn't really like it, but it's one of those things which I was prepared to accept, because it's kind of like, it makes sense, because the wool grows so thickly in there, then it builds, then with the wax and natural things that you produce, it then makes it worse. Now, there was a debate it would make the situation worse or make them produce more wax, and this is completely off topic. But now the rule is they can't do it. The rule is now the groomers are not allowed to pluck their ears. Okay, fine. That's the rule being put through. Well, ever since then, he's pretty much had non-stop ear infections, and it's got worse and worse and worse. And honestly, if I could pay for him to get LASIK on his ears or something like that, I would. Because the poor dog has been suffering non-stop. It's just a constant thing for him to deal with. With him hearing me talk about it, he's now shaking his head. But yeah. Now, if you're thinking she's big, she is big. She's 1,882 tons burthen. Okay, she's not as big as HMS Victory, but she's big. She carries 28 British 32-pounders. That's often the description put. And this is at 1702. 28 18-pounders on the middle gun deck, 28 9-pounders on the upper gun deck, and 12 6-pounders on the quarterdeck, and 4 6-pounders on the forecastle. For her to be carrying her 100 guns. Her 100 guns. It's always worth thinking about that. She's carrying 100 guns, and that's a significant firepower. Now, the thing is, at the point, you still sometimes get people trying to return to the old phrasing, the old naming of guns. So sometimes people describe them as demi-cannon and culverins and all these things, but they're still the 18-pounders, the 32-pounders. She has a rebuild in 1728. Her rebuild in 1728 makes her still a 100-gun ship. She's rebuilt into the 1719 establishment properly at this point. And she's armed with 28 42-pounders on her lower gun deck, 28 24-pounders on her middle gun deck, 28 12-pounders on her upper gun deck. And she still has the 6-pounders in the quarterdeck and forecastle. But if we consider that simply, well, her upper gun deck has increased its firepower by 30%. So has her her middle gun deck. And her lower gun deck is roughly gone up by about a little under 30%. So she's still got 100 guns, but for all of you to answer in the chat, and I just want you to think about this, would you prefer to be engaging a 100-gun ship armed with 32-pounders, 18-pounders, and 9-pounders, or 42-pounders, 24-pounders, and 12-pounders? Just, which would you prefer to have shooting at you? Just a question. Have you looked at the ear, nose, hair trimmer for Raleigh? I have looked into them. They don't seem to work that way well with the wool, etc. And from the looks of things, which is why I was talking about the LASIK. Cody, how do I know both? What is the rate of fire? It's the same with both. My God, the rate of fire doesn't dip down because the guns are heavier. Neither seems to be popular. That's good. The heavier guns at least hit me over quickly. Laser hurts. Yeah, it does. I don't know what to do about the poor dog. Really, I don't. Try and work out his ears. I'll figure out something for him. I will do. He's a good fluff. And as said, I will be on Discord after this for chatting. I will be on Discord after this. Doggo will need to be sedated. Yeah, but he's got to be... the thing about Runon that worries me is he having to be sedated every now and again for his ears anyway, so... The thing is, if the LASIK stopped him having to be sedated so often to have his ears cleaned, then maybe it's a less risky option. Mark Hartness, I'd rather be on land talking about the aftermath. Yeah. That seems to be a popular one. That seems to be a popular one. It seems to be a popular one. Thanks for the thought, Stafford. I said I don't want to be shooting it down so quickly, but yeah, I have thought about it. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the options are going to be in the end. We'll see. So most of the options seem to be you prefer to be hit by neither. And I would agree with that. Now, the reason why I picked her is because she's actually quite famous. If you've ever played Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag, she's one of the ships which Edward Kenny can sink. Now, the thing is, whenever I look at that scenario, you need an Assassin's Creed to have a chance of winning, Because HMS Fearless and HMS Royal Sovereign, between them, are mounting enough firepower that pretty much anything which fights them, if it's solo ship, should be crying. It's also Royal Sovereign from which Admiral Boscawen authorised the firing squad on HMS Monarch to execute Admiral Byng. She was the flagship for George Roke in the War of the Spanish Succession. She was the flagship of Culsey's Shovel. She was the flagship during the 7 Years' War for him. She did all sorts of service. She's a good ship. Alceralio, thank you. Dutchman, would there be enough gun crews if the battle were to take place on both sides? Yes. They would carry enough personnel to be able to do that. If we consider she's a 100-gun ship, and usually she'd be carrying roughly 800 crew. Now, you would probably want more, if you could, but one of the things the blocks and pulleys are used for, if we go back to here, you can see the blocks and the pulleys are used to make hauling these forward. So you can technically run a cannon with 4 or 6 personnel. So technically, if you have a little over 800 personnel aboard, you can, in theory, run all the guns on your ship. But it's well known that once you're talking about the bigger guns, they do tend to need more people. So the bigger guns down the bottom, definitely 6. The higher ones up there can be run with 4. Now, you might prefer to have 8. If you're engaged on one side, you might want to make it up to 8. And have the gun crews combined. But you can do minimal. What did gun crews do on outside and combination at the first rates? I can't imagine there was enough crew needed on the sails to keep them all busy. Well, it's not necessarily up the sails, but there's also the ropes on the deck. There's all sorts of duties you have to be doing. Cleaning the ship constantly, maintaining the guns, maintaining the carriages. There are lots of duties you can find for people to do. Manning the boats, boarding parties. There are always things. Let's put it this way. If you want to have fun on a ship, go aboard it. Find someone that everyone calls the chief. They'll probably be the chief senior petty officer of the ship, of a warship, and say, "I'm bored and have nothing to do." They won't care if you're a civilian or not. They will find something for you to do within 2 seconds flat, because they are absolutely allergic to the idea of idleness, of you saying you have nothing to do. Trust me, there is always something they will find for you to do. There's mending the rigging, mending a sail, painting the ship. That was something they kept doing constantly. And there's always carpentry going on. Would this be a good way to volunteer on a museum ship? Probably would. Probably would work. And also, you have to remember, the guns are run out every day and fired. They do firing practice daily. The French and Spanish might dry fire when they're in harbour, rather than actually firing the guns. They might just run through the motion of the guns. And the British did the same when they up in Rosyth in terms of the battlecruiser squadron, later on fleet, during World War One. Because you're in harbour with a load of civilians around. But usually when you're at sea, or in somewhere like Scapa Flow, you fire the guns every day! You fire them! Would you rather be flogged or whipped? The whip can go deeper and can cause actually more damage. The flog tends to be more spread out and will tend to cause more surface damage, but can scrape along skin quite nasty. So, I if I have done something guilty of that level of punishment in the Age of Sail Navy, and I was given the choice for some reason, I would hope that they had a starter rather than a flogger or a whip to hit me with, because a starter is a wooden cane, and that might be harder, but that's less likely to do penetrative scraping damage on my skin and other things. Board sailors will create their own entertainment. Yeah. I'm civilian. My men haven't had a good man overboard drill lately. Oh, good lord, yeah. Yeah, it's neither, usually. But anyway, this leads us rather nicely to looking at HMS Victory. Now, I've skipped through. I haven't done every single first-rate ship and every single production produced, but I wanted to give you an overview of what was driving the changes. It's the guns, but it's also the size of the rigging. It's what you want out of the ships. It's how much stores you want to put in, where you want them to go, and what you can support and sustain. All these things have led to the growth of ships. She displaces 3,500 tons. She's 2,142 tons burthen, and that's a fun estimate to carry. She's got 104 guns. HMS Victory is solidly in the we do not want to muck around, we do not want to find out. She is very much frigate around and find out. She is armed with 32 pounders on her lower gun deck. 24 pounders on her middle gun deck. Her upper gun deck is armed with 30 12-pounders. Her quarterdeck has 12 12-pounders. And her forecastle has 2 12-pounders and 2 68-pounder carronades. Now, I should note that there is something interesting about her, because you have a long and short pattern guns, right, in this period. And so your choice, you can go for, well, I could have a 42-pounder short pattern gun, or I can have a 32-pounder long pattern gun. And for both her 32-pounders and 24-pounders, she's gone for the long pattern gun. Now, if you look at their weight, then you consider the weight of the guns, which would be bigger than them. The standard or short patterns, the difference in weight makes sense. She could have carried 28 42-pounder standards, but 32 pounder longs give her a longer range and make it better for her. Thank you, Colin Cameron. Look, if you all keep talking about the various sails, various punishments, so I'm going to introduce you to one, as you are interested in it in the chat. There's this thing called keel hauling, where literally you're attached to a rope, you're dropped down at the front, and you're hauled underneath the ship. If you live, you get to go back into the service and serve the crew. If you die, sorry. That was your punishment. To be keel hauled. Literally dragged underneath your own ship. So, there are worse things in this world than flogging as punishments. Keel hauling is just a capital punishment, not a punishment. Technically, it was a punishment. I think if I was offered keel hauling, I think I'd probably choose execution. It's an easier and quicker way to go. But it does have the chance. And yet, Victory's preferred range was punching range. Honestly, most of these warships' preferred range is punching range. But let's think about all that goes into building this ship. All that's required to build this ship. 6,000 trees. By the way, what do we mean by 6,000 trees? We mean by 6,000 standard sets of wood. Lengths of tree, weights of tree. 5,400 of those trees were oak. 5,400 oak trees. Think about that. A crew of 850. Displacing roughly 3,500 tons. She is, as I've already mentioned, between over 4 times the size to a little bit over 3 times the size of Mary Rose. This ship is built because you need it. Because you need the status of a first rate, the status of this big, thundering behemoth. Because, guess what? Breaking the line, anchoring the line, comes before breaking the line. And first thing the first rates they would do is anchor the line. They'd anchor the centre, because the enemy the fleet would tend to try and press the centre, because if they could break the centre of the line and break the fleet into 2 halves, then that was basically the same as breaking the line. And they could then pick off 1 half and massacre it. And that was how they would win the battle. So you'd want these big behemoths in the centre of your line. You'd want them coordinating your force. A ship which solo can take on 1, 2, 3, 4 of the other enemy capital ships and has enough firepower, enough punch, enough mass to whack them and hold them at bay. That is the purpose of these ships. And then later on you have admirals like Rodney, St. Vincent, Nelson, Collingwood, Duncan, and others turn these huge bulwarks from bulwarks who would hold the line into smashing behemoths which would crash through the enemy line at the romping, stomping speed of 11 knots. I know. Age of Sail speeds don't quite hit the same, do they? But that's what this ship was for. This ship was about providing overwhelming firepower where you needed it. Yes, it's expensive. Yes, it's far more efficient to crank out third rates. But honestly, when you need a first rate, nothing else will do. Every other time a third rate will do. But when you need a first rate, you need a first rate. And these ships and the effort which goes into them take generations, take centuries to build up to. To build a ship of this capability, especially when you think that how long separates it all the way back to Mary Rose. Mary Rose is 1511. 1511. That's 1765. That's 254 years between the two. $254 years. 2.5 centuries of building, constructing, learning. And why am I saying building and construction different? Building the infrastructure, building the organization, building the systems which make it work behind it. which make it possible. Cody 88 makes America's lack of ships line more unforgivable. It does, but it also shows you the sheer amount of investment needed. And you can honestly argue whether the US Senate, whether even the US government in the in the late 18th century, let alone the early 19th century, were in a position to do it. Building heavy frigates is one thing. They build very good heavy frigates. Building ships of the line, that requires a whole level beyond. A whole level beyond. That's what, with me, the difference that gets me is the 50 years difference between HMS Warrior and Warspite. Well, that's when you realize how quickly technology matures. But also what they are building themselves and basing themselves on. You see, one of the things is, when you're building the infrastructure which supports these, you're building it for the first time. The advantage the Royal Navy has when it's implementing infrastructure for the Steam Navy, the Iron Navy, and all these improvements as they evolution is they've got a working example of how to run infrastructure, how to run procurement, that they're already using, that they've developed over hundreds of years, and they transpose it across. Yes, they make adaptations. Yes, they make modifications for what they need for this specific area, but they have this infrastructure in place. They have the yards in place. They have the skilled naval architects. They have the skilled engineers. They have the skilled craftsmen. They know how to train skilled craftsmen. This is the thing when we talk about building or standing on the shoulders of giants. This is what we really mean. What we mean is we're able to take what we have already developed and transpose it into the new world. And it's only roughly 2 centuries from then until you have, well, landing on the moon, I think. The first lunar landing, just remembering it. Trying to remember from memory the first lunar landing. 68, yeah. Roughly 2 centuries later, they're landing on the moon. After HMS Victory is launched. Senator, would Mary Rose have been useful in the time of HMS Victory, even as storeship? No. Honestly, the thing about Mary Rose, by the time you get to the time of HMS Victory, ships that size just don't fit into the fleet pan. She isn't fast enough. She doesn't operate fast enough. 66 for Moon. Let me just check it up. 1969. Ah, yeah. 1969. Apollo 11. Don't know why I've started sneezing this evening. Anyway, so yeah, this is what we're talking about. With these ships, with their growth, what explains the growth from Mary Rose to Victory? Well, A, the size of the guns increase. B, the number you want to carry increases, but most importantly, what you want to do with it increases. Mary Rose is a vessel which goes out to sea, stomps around the channel, and then comes home. Victory is a vessel which goes off to the Mediterranean for months on end, and does nasty things and then comes home. That's the difference. Don't worry, Santa Canera. I should know to always check. And, again, for those thinking HMS Victory was sacrosanct or something, She wasn't. She was not. She had her refits, she had her rebuilds. In December 1798, she's refitted as a hospital ship for wounded French and British prisoners of war, moored in the Medway. The Admiralty at one point were trying to convert her to a prison hulk, but the Navy Board advised that if they did that, that would be a permanent conversion. It means she could never be turned back into a warship, which they didn't want. They wanted her as Naval. And when HMS Impregnable, a second-rate 98 gunship, was wrecked in October 1799, they decided that, frankly, they were going to be better off refitting her. You see, the Royal Navy needed a certain number of free deck ships aligned. They didn't really care if they were a first rate or a second rate at this point. They just needed a certain number. The sheer volume of third rates dealt with fighting the battles. The first and second rates were just a bonus. They were the leadership. They were, as said, the senders line, but you just needed a free deck ship for it. Because, again, the advantage of firing down. As you see, notice, her forecastle's completely gone. She's got no forecastle. She's got a little bit of raised bit of stern, but that's more accommodations than anything else. Her castle status, her shape state, ability to it comes from her ability to fire down into other ships, which is a whole ship thing. It's the whole deck. And, well, she goes in for a refit. Her renovation starts in 1800, and it it was expected to cost £24,000. It ended up costing over £71,000 because they found they had to do far more extensive work than they thought they had to. They didn't bother about it though. That was necessary. She increased from 100 to 104 guns. They cut it. They actually increased the number of piercings, so she could have 4 more guns. Her powder magazine was sheathed in copper, as that would reduce the risk of sparks and also protect against rodents getting into the powder magazine. They closed up the open galleries on her stern. This, they felt, would help with cabin space and also provide extra protection for rough weather. They added more weatherproofing to give her better stability in terms of high comings and around the hatchways. And the chainwells were moved above the gun ports to prevent gun handling interfering with the rigging. You can see those positions. That's what they've done. They've moved them up above the gun ports. They also decided to give her a less ornate figurehead. Because, well, the original was just massive and was unwieldy, and they didn't really like it, so they fitted a new one. And that's the one we see today, which I always think is rather cute, but yeah, you know, these things happen. And she's repainted from red to black and yellow. Red having been quite a standard colouring as well at the time. Again, it was cheap. And it was a cheap colour. The material, the red paint was, when she was originally painted in red, was a cheap colour that preserved wood because of the materials that went into the red. This is one of the things which often comes up. When we say red was cheap, red paint was cheap, or red dye was cheap, we're talking about hardy dyes. We're talking about paints which are basically protection against corrosion to an extent, or rotting. And they are cheaper than the other colours in that field. They're not necessarily the cheapest colour you can paint the ship, but they're the cheapest one you can paint the ship that'll actually do it any good. Free Decker wasn't realistically an admiral's yacht. That's again something which comes up sometimes in discussions. As I've said before, the free decker often used by an admiral, but as I've talked about with St. Vincent, with Rodney, they don't always demand they're in the biggest ship. The senior admiral doesn't really care about being in the biggest ship. The thing is, you need these big ships to anchor that line, and also to provide the punching power to break through the enemy line. And so often the admirals will use them themselves, because that means they're personally in command of their biggest asset. It's kind of like, why do generals tend to have direct control over their heaviest artillery battery as their personal shotgun for affecting the battle? It's the same with the free deckers. Yeah, pretty much. You've got it. Red lead, red oxide, copper base. You know, there's all the various mixtures they use. The fighting tops, which had been oak up until that point, were replaced with fir to save weight. And they were also manufactured by New Technique, or sort of New Technique at the time. They were made into two pieces, which meant you could more easily take them off and put them on again for storing the ship. Because one of the things, when you reduce a ship to ordinary, you often take its mast down. Why? Because they're a weight on the ship, and because the masts are valuable, and you might be able to use them on something else. Anyway, her work's completed in 1803, and yeah, she goes out, and Nelson, first of all, gets his flag captain is Samuel Sutton as his flag captain in May 1803. Eventually, he changes over to Hardy when Sutton gets a promotion. It's not a normal thing for that, an unusual thing for that sort of thing to happen. And it's, that she's a good ship. She's not always the thing about first rates is they are often picked out because they have issues in terms of they get warm, they don't get the same rate. It's not able to be the same rotation with first rates as there is with third rates for some reason. I can't think why. If you have, and this is worthwhile thinking about. The Royal Navy is operating 70 third-rate ships of the line in 1794. In 1814, they have 103 in service, in commission, as in at the time. For some reason, you can achieve far more rotation of vessels in terms of their fleet and far more regular service when you have 70 or 103 than you can when you have 8 first-rate ships of the line in service, or 5 first-rate ships of the line in service in 1794, etc. Can't think why. The masts were made of fir, so were the fighting tops. Those bits you see up there, the spaces where I will not let you climb to, Dan. No. She is what she is. So, with that being said, I'll do questions for roughly 20 minutes. If anyone's got any questions about tonight, and then I will be on Discord afterwards, where I will chat away with people if they have any questions on me. Tomorrow's video is a premiere, which is St. Vincent, which was supposed to be Wednesday's video, but got delayed because the internet was playing up. Now the internet is, broadly speaking, I don't know what it's been like from your perspective, but from mine it's been very good this evening. I have dropped some frames, but not many. It's less than 1%. So I think that's quite good. I think that's quite good. And so far, well, if I do a speed test on my system, we appear to be running quite well. I think only one of the systems is working. I think BT is not working, and BT keeps coming in and not working and then not working. When it is working, we go very high in terms of capability. When it isn't working, we go not so high. But I have set it up so that the network considers the internet connection one connection, despite being spread over two lines, which does help sometimes. It helps in terms of making it all work. Upload has been fairly constant for quite a while now. Download fairly minimal. Upload fairly constant. Seems to be anything wrong. Yeah, that's good. You're not going anywhere that high. Yeah. Just wait until we get into Japan, Dan. You're going that high, just not in that scenario, because I know I'd end up, in the nicest way, the only one who seems to be really comfortable with heights and doing random stuff in heights in our group, in the ship-shaped crew, is me. I don't know what it is, but I'll be... If we need to go up a really high space or down in the really depths of the ship, usually be me down in the really depths. Dan will come down quite a fair bit, me. Again, I'm going up really high. If there's a precarious ladder to climb up a funnel, HMCS Sackville, that was me. Up the radar. Don't know why I get these points. Did you miss any good tidbits? I hope not, considering this, but, you know, watch the whole thing to be sure. Dan Freeman, HMS Fluffy Kitten versus a KMS Slaughter Murder Death Ship. Not really. Let's be honest. The Royal Navy ships of the line are always a fun thing. Once you go through the ships of the line and the list of names, if we consider the third rates from the 1660 to 1777 restoration period, they are HMS Clove Tree, HMS House of Swedes, HMS Golden Phoenix, HMS Sloveny, HMS Helveson, which, by the way, the first ones were all captured from the Dutch and kept the names in service. HMS Cambridge, HMS Warspite, HMS Defiance, HMS Rupert, HMS Resolution, HMS Monmouth, HMS Edgar, HMS Swifter, HMS Harwich, HMS Royal Oak, HMS Defiance, Arms of Rotterdam, and Montague. I think possibly what happens is we capture everyone else's ships and then use them. Honestly, it gets worse the lower you go. The names that they come with the ships get worse the lower you go. Second rates in the 30 ships program 1677 were Vanguard, Windsor Castle, Sandwich, Duchess, Albemarle, Neptune, Duke, Ossory, and Coronation. Ossory is always the one which is a fun thing to have, but was named, of course, for Thomas Butler, the 6th Earl of Ossory, who was, how do I put this politely, a singly violent general and admiral. Really did believe violence was the answer to most issues. And it goes on like that. The Royal Navy really... basically, what you have to remember about the British is they pick very violent names. It's just... They're only violent if you know what you're talking about. They sound peaceful, and then you go look them up who they're named for, and you go, oh, that's evil. Yeah, the Royal Navy is the sort of one that goes, oh, we have a ship which is called Weymouth. And, that sounds nothing too bad. It's called Weymouth. Okay. What's it named for? Is it named for the town of Weymouth? Yes, it is. But then you start looking up their battle honours and what Weymouths have done. And you start realising that this ship, which is named for this lovely little town in Dorset, which is a beautiful town to do, has a battle record 2 arms long and has done nasty things on several oceans. In other words, it sounds like a nice thing until you go and do any research. Take care, KVG. An FPS drop here or there. Oh, okay. Cody888, if the Aussies or Kiwis had built their own ships of line with local materials, which woods would they have chosen? Goodness knows. I'd have to know more about the trees in Australia and New Zealand before I picked them. They have some good solid trees to pick from. But I'm not sure. Some of their trees are very flammable. And that's the exact thing you wouldn't want. But there again, maybe you could season them. And maybe if you season them like pine in salt water, you get the sap out of them and they be turned as good as dough. So maybe they would then be good. It's going to depend on a lot of work and study to work it out properly. Dan Freeman, I have a strong sense of my own mortality, squishiness, and competence. I will disagree with 1 out of 3 of those. I don't mind you having a strong sense of your own mortality. I am fine with you having a sense of your own squishiness. But I will disagree with you calling yourself saying you have incompetence. Matrix 4, will we ever see the Captain Vian pose on Haida? Yeah, I think I have the pictures. I will someday post them. Possibly get them out for the 25th of this month. For Williams, I don't like heights. Petty officer, yes you do, boy. Get up that mast. Yes, I joined up at Ganges. Good luck. That the Marine Nationale, well, yeah, in nicest way, lots of navies were the involuntary Royal Navy Reserve, but there again, we must consider that the other navies did occasionally capture British ships and reuse them. The French even had one at the Battle of Trafalgar. I think there was some on that line which were formerly British-built vessels, which they hadn't even changed the names of. But it's when you realise that overall the French and Spanish brought 70 ships of the line to the Trafalgar campaign, and the British brought 56. And then you realise that the British have sitting back behind all the ships on the Trafalgar line. They also have the ships sitting in the Channel Squadron and the Western Squadron, and a North Sea Fleet. And you have all these formations sitting there going, so you're gonna come fight us? Really? You're gonna come fight us? Dan, I've been out in Weymouth. That place is rough. Dan, yeah, no. I've seen where you thought was rough in Sydney. No. Your and I's definition of what is a rough place to go out for a night are very different. As much as you're one of my closest friends and a really cool guy, and I still do hope maybe free for my birthday. I know you're probably not going to be free for my birthday, but maybe free. Yeah. Hey, it's great. Getting curb stomped by HMS Pickle would just be embarrassing. Some ships did get the cuz. That's the thing. HMS Pickle is not without her successes. Sandwich was a name for an admiral. Sandwich is a name for a First Lord of the Admiralty, who is it's a civil lord of the Admiralty, the Lord of Sandwich. Still very, very good. Kind of scary, though, when you consider all their history. Naval said, if you can't do it by using your mind, brute force is the next option. Does work, Raptor. It does. Charles, should the US name a carrier Enola Gay? No. Although, I have been surprised at the number of comments which have been coming in thinking that the Americans will change the name of the fourth of the new class of carrier. The Gerald Fords are good ships, but I don't think I don't think the Doris Miller is getting her name changed. I would myself put more money on the William J. Clinton getting its name changed before the Doris Miller, because that's not even under construction yet. Doris Miller is named for a war hero. I don't think, and war hero and all sorts of things Doris Miller did. He was a very, very cool gentleman, very capable gentleman who died in 1943 serving in the US Navy. He did all sorts of things during Pearl Harbor. He was aboard West Virginia. He manned anti-aircraft guns, carried sailors to safety, and shot down a plane, according to records. This is not a guy who is going to get the ship named after him name changed by the current administration, in my view. Napoleon was that arrogant. I don't think. Napoleon could be incredibly arrogant, but he could also be very silly when it comes to the sea. But mostly because, as an artilleryman, he presumed he understood the sea because naval warfare was artillery, as far as he was concerned. So therefore, it was just roll up your guns, get your guns into position, and engage. That's what he thought naval warfare was like. He literally thought it was, you show up and you have an artillery exchange. And as an artilleryman, he knew artillery. So whoever had the most guns would win the artillery battle, because that's how it goes on land in his view. His view being, of course, there's no topography on sea. It's all flat. So therefore, if you're on a flat area and you're having an artillery duel, the person with the most artillery wins, right? Forgetting the fact that this artillery is self-propelled and going to be angling. And the sea is definitely not flat. It's going up and down all over the place all the time. That was the problem for Napoleon. Doris Miller, yeah, I've had one comment which has made it through, and I've had about 5 or 6 comments which were so full of swear words they didn't make it through. They got blocked by the settings on it because I've said before, I openly admit I do not censor comments. I will not stop comments going through unless they break the little cousin friendly rules. Because it's got to be little cousin friendly because my little cousins can't learn things from my own channel. So that means there is very clear rules on my channel and explain that my little cousins, who are far too young, will go and watch my videos. I am outnumbered heavily by cousins. I don't want to be mullered, so therefore I make sure this channel is little cousin friendly. I don't do videos for kids. That's not the aim of this channel. This is not for children. But I do it in a way which is as they are not going to be going and learning bad words from Uncle Alex, and I'm not going to get in trouble. So we have those rules on the comments, and we have those rules in the chat, and most people don't seem to worry about it. But yeah, a lot of the people making those comments about the Doris Miller seem to just add in swear words for no reason. Naming for prestige ships is an important thing. It is. It is an important thing. I do sometimes worry. It's like if we had a third Queen Elizabeth class, there's no scenario where that's not called Ark Royal. A fourth probably called Eagle. I used to have this conversation back when I was doing my PhD because Andrew Lambert would usually tell me and put the case forward that if we had a fourth, it would be called HMS Victory. And this vessel will be changed to HMS Victory 1805 or something like that. And I didn't think that, whilst I thought that was a great thing to have in terms of status, I don't think it would work. I thought it would be Eagle. Honestly, we could do a third Queen Elizabeth class. We could do with the aircraft for 3 Queen Elizabeth class. We could do with the escorts for 3 Queen Elizabeth classes, and the supply ships for 3 to carry battle groups at the moment. We really could do with that, but we don't. That is one thing which I say, looking through this history, and Steve, you are probably going to hear this from me, is I did not enjoy. Considering just how much of this history where we have forgotten. You know, you think about this, we were able to present that much force and grow the fleet to that size because we literally had layers upon layers of reserve built in at every single level of infrastructure. We had ships in ordinary. We had huge stores of wood, of canvas, of cannon, of all the materials we needed. And we mobilized it, and we knew how to. And nowadays, not even the US has that. They have more resources than pretty much anyone else, and if you go to their boneyards, they have all sorts of equipment in there. But no one in the West truly does reserves. No one in the West truly does depth. And it's a problem. Code 88. So what happened to the ship line that the colonies built but and sold to the French? I think the French ended up wrecking her. From memory, I think the USS America was wrecked. Well, might not have been wrecked specifically, but I think she was worn out and basically condemned. She didn't last long in service from memory. I'd have to look that up, though, to be sure. have done a video, I think, where I talked about her. Mark Harness, it's artillery if the artillery is running as cavalry at the same time. Yeah, that's the thing, and across a topographical field which keeps changing and is definitely not flat. Dan Freeman. Not that the RN needs to sense the name for politicians, but we don't seem to have a Richard II, a Richard III, or an Edward VIII. No, we're very good at that. We get rid of that. We manage to avoid those things. Oh. That's good. I think you're more likely to get HMS Victorious as Queen in another forward than HMS Victory. Yeah, I'd say Eagle's the most likely of the set, but you know, Victorious is more likely. Trust me. Mm, if I'm not mistaken, let's see. He was killed in action aboard aboard the Liscombe Bay, which was an escort carrier. So, whilst I can see your phrasing, Charles, I can also say there is enough connection to my mind that him having a carrier is not breaking the tradition or breaking the rules because he died aboard an aircraft carrier. I think, therefore, if you're a Medal of Honor winner and you have died aboard an aircraft carrier or have been in such a scenario, I think getting an aircraft carrier name for you is not necessarily wrong. There is enough of a justification there that you're not going to get any critique from me. I realise there are some people who are more worried about these things than I, but for me, he died aboard an aircraft carrier. He was he was doing a very good job. He deserves everything that's named after him, and he's a good one to bring up. He's a good one. He is a fine sailor and a fine one to give as an inspiration to the wider navy. And I always think when you're picking an aircraft carrier's name, picking a capital ship's name, you're also trying to inspire your whole navy. And I much prefer naming it for him than I do for politicians who are alive. Lions, I know it's naive to say, but there is a part of me that says, yes, you're acquiring free ships, there's almost no point in any of them. Yeah, well, the thing was, the two carriers were supposed to be working with at least two LHDs. And that made sense of it, because then you had 4 flight decks. And, you know, that would work. They'd work as basically, you'd be working them as one set, as a set. And they haven't done that. And so, yeah, that's the problem. The problem is when you have bright ideas about sharing things across different types of ship for the duties, and then you don't get the other type, and so you end up with just, oh, we just got the 2 carriers. Navy Cross, yeah, well, not the Congressional Medal on. Yeah, I remember he didn't get the CMH because of politics. So yeah, but still, Navy Cross is still good enough, as far as I'm concerned with Doris Miller. Knowing what I do about his story and what he did, frankly, he was a hero, and it deserves it. The moment you have it involving, in the nicest way, carriers have been legacy ship names, have been all sorts of things in the past. They really have been battles, presidents. Yeah, the U.S. Navy's naming conventions are, in the words of, they're not that old. Okay. Bonhomme Richard is coming, etc., or Shangri-La, and yeah, there's all sorts of exceptions in there. There has been enough variety, they are recent enough, they can get away with these things. Right then, with that all being said, I'm going to go and find the facilities, check on the family, check everyone's okay. I saw a sister, I'll check a mother, and then I will and check the dogs are all okay, and then I will be in the Discord to chat away with you all. Thank you very much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this evening. Hope you found it useful. Please do like, share, and subscribe if you like the videos. It really does help the channel grow and really does make things better because it allows me to reach more people. And yeah, next week's 11th of March video, you will know soon because I'm trying to plan to record it tomorrow and get it up soon. And yeah, we're going to be having fun. My plan is to get a lot of these things done over the next couple of days because I'm trying to get to the point where I'm recording and uploading videos at least 2 weeks in advance. And you know, I like Patreon premieres because they allow me to still chat with you all when it goes live, which I enjoy. And also, if I've got everything uploaded and everything ready, then probably Saturday night on Twitch, if you're watching, I'll do a guerrilla stream with Space Marine, me learning how to use it before I start doing some co-op operations with you all, and maybe organise a shipshape crew. We'll see. It depends if Dan Freeman feels up to playing Space Marine 2, whether we have a whole ship-shaped crew engagement. We might have to actually get him a gaming console or something for that to work. I'm not sure. We'll see. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for all for watching. And yeah, hope you enjoyed. Toodles.